Welcome to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The hollow gaze. The cabin's wooden walls creaked under the weight of the night, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Claire, barely 13, lay on the bottom bunk, her sleeping bag tangled around her legs. Back when I was in middle school, we had a school trip over one weekend to a camp. The girls' cabin was a maze of shadows, its open main room lit only by slivers of moonlight slipping through a window. The layout of the girls' cabin was an open main room where you came inside with two bunk beds in the left corner, with a single bed between them. Claire's friends snored softly, the first night's laughter a distant memory. The first night went as you'd expect, to staying up late, laughing and just messing around, then passing out for the whole night. But tonight, something felt wrong, like the darkness was watching. Claire stirred, her eyes fluttering open in the oppressive quiet. The second night was a bit different, though we were all asleep by midnight, but I ended up waking up sometime later. She fumbled for her flip phone, its dim screen a faint comfort. I used my flip phone to check the time. The glow showed it was just past 2 a.m., the camp silent except for the faint rustle of leaves outside. I sat up a bit to stretch and turn over in bed away from the wall. She shifted, her body heavy with sleep, and turned toward the open room. But once I was almost completely turned over into my other side, I froze. Her breath caught as her eyes locked onto a figure standing in the center of the room. The moonlight painted him in stark relief. A boy, pale as bone, with short blonde hair and a simple t-shirt and shorts. A boy pale with short blonde hair, wearing a simple t-shirt and shorts, stood in the middle of the girls' cabin staring at me. He looked like any camper, except for his face. He had no eyes. They were just black voids where his eyes should have been. The empty sockets seemed to pull at her, a void that felt alive, staring despite its emptiness. Even still, I can only describe it as he was staring at me. Claire's heart pounded, her body paralyzed as she stared back, trapped in the weight of his gaze. The boy didn't move, his presence a cold anchor in the room. I just sat there and stared back. Seconds stretched into eternity, the silence deafening. I must have stared at him for a good 15 seconds. Claire's hand crept toward the flashlight beside her phone, her eyes never leaving the figure. I started to slowly reach for the small flashlight that I kept next to my phone on the bed. Her fingers closed around it, trembling. I never looked away from him as I brought the flashlight up and turned it on. The beam cut through the dark, flooding the room with light. The room was suddenly bright, and the boy was nowhere to be found. The space was empty. The moonlight now, just a soft glow on the floor. Claire's hand shook as she switched off the flashlight, her breath shallow. I turned the light back off soon after, not wanting to wake anyone. The darkness returned, heavier now, pressing against her chest. Then, a voice broke the silence. Her friend, Lily, on the bunk above. I heard my friend on the bunk above me speak up. She simply asked if I had seen him too. Claire's throat tightened, her voice barely a whisper. I replied, yeah, before turning back over to go back to sleep facing the wall again. She curled into her sleeping bag, her mind racing. It took a while to fall back to sleep after that, but eventually I managed. The boy's eyeless face lingered, burned into her thoughts, a specter she couldn't shake. Claire woke to the chatter of her classmates, the cabin bright with morning light. She avoided Lily's eyes, afraid to confirm what they'd seen. The camp bustled with activity, but Claire felt detached, the boy's image a constant shadow. She scanned the other campers, half expecting to see him among them, but no one matched his pale features or eerie stillness. Lily didn't bring it up. and Claire followed her lead, burying the moment in silence. They packed their bags and left the camp that day, the forest fading behind them, but the memory clung to Claire like damp air. Back home, Claire couldn't let it go. She sketched the boy's face in her notebook, the black void stark against the paper, hoping to make sense of it. She asked her parents about the camp's history, but they knew nothing beyond its reputation as a school retreat. Online, she found rumors, stories of a boy who'd vanished decades ago, his name lost to time. The details were vague, but the mention of a pale figure sent a chill through her. Had he been looking for something? Or someone? The thought made her lock her bedroom door at night, her flashlight now a permanent fixture by her bed. Claire's dreams became a battleground, the boy's eyeless gaze waiting in every shadow. She'd wake gasping, the cabin's layout vivid in her mind. The bunk beds, the moonlight, the emptiness where he'd stood. She confided in Lily months later, and her friend's quiet nod confirmed the shared terror. They never returned to the camp, and their friendship grew quieter, as if the boy's presence had wedged between them. Claire avoided sleepovers, the thought of dark rooms too much. She wondered if he was still there, standing in that cabin, waiting for the next girl to wake. Years later, Claire still carried the weight of that night. She'd grown into a skeptic, dismissing most ghost stories. But the boy was different, too real, too vivid. She visited the camp's website once, now abandoned, its photos showing the same cabin, unchanged. The sight of it twisted her stomach, and she closed the tab. She told the story sparingly, bracing for disbelief. But Lily's confirmation gave it weight. The boy wasn't a trick of the mind. He was something else, something that had chosen them. Claire kept a flashlight on her nightstand, its beam a reminder of the light that had banished him. If only for a moment, sometimes, in the quiet of night. Claire would feel a prickle on her neck, as if someone were watching. She'd turn, expecting those black voids, but find only darkness. The camp was gone, razed for a housing development, but Claire wondered if the boy had moved with it, or if he was tied to her now, a silent passenger in her life. She never found answers, only questions that grew sharper with time. The hollow gaze had marked her, a memory she couldn't outrun, a reminder that some things in the dark don't need eyes to see. The soldier's echo, in the heart of a sunlit trail. A fleeting shadow can rewrite your truth. The Four Springs Trail in Natural Bridge, Virginia, was Owen's haven, its winding paths a sanctuary for a hiker who thrived in nature's embrace, a skeptic by nature. He laughed off tales of the uncanny, his boots grounded in the earth's rhythm. The forest was his refuge, its silence a canvas for thought. But some echoes linger beyond the grave. Owen tread the familiar path, the trail quiet under a clear sky, his senses sharp as he rounded a bend. The trail was sparsely traveled, its solitude a gift Owen cherished. He moved with ease, the forest alive with birdsong, the air crisp and pure. A flicker caught his eye, a shape to his right, and he turned, expecting a hiker passing close. His breath caught. There, 5 feet away, stood a figure in an ancient military uniform, its fabric faded, an old rifle gripped in steady hands. The soldier's eyes met his, piercing, unyielding, a presence that defied the daylight. Unlike the tree stumps that often tricked him, this lingered, a fraction too long, with no object to explain its form. Owen froze, his skepticism unraveling, the forest's song fading to a hush. The figure was no mirage, its weight a challenge to his rational mind. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the trail's stillness, the memory searing his thoughts. The path stretched on, but Owen's world had shifted. The soldier's echo a riddle he couldn't ignore. He was no stranger to the wild, but this was too different. A glimpse into a beast that refused to rest. The trail held a secret, and Owen was its unwilling keeper. His steps faltered, the forest no longer familiar. The soldier's gaze lingered in his mind, a call to uncover the truth. The echo was alive, and Owen would follow its trace. Owen's hike continued, but the soldier's echo haunted every step. The forest, once a friend, now felt watchful, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. He returned to the spot, heart racing, finding no trace. The trail as pristine as before. The encounter defied logic. No fatigue, no substances clouded his mind. Yet the soldier's form was undeniable. Owen, a man of reason, grappled with the impossible, his disbelief a fragile shield. The image of the uniform, the rifle, burned vivid, a memory too real to dismiss. He delved into the trail's history, uncovering tales of a forgotten skirmish, soldiers lost in these woods, their stories buried by time. A name emerged, Elijah, a young rifleman, fallen in a clash, his grave unmarked. Owen felt him, the soldier's echo tied to the land, his gaze a plea for remembrance. He spoke to locals, rangers who whispered of sightings, fleeting figures in old garb, always near the trail's bend. The forest was a keeper of ghosts. Elijah's spirit bound by duty unfulfilled. Owen's skepticism softened, the echo a bridge to a truth he'd ignored. He returned with a small token, a carved stone placed at the bend, a gesture to honor Elijah. The air shifted, lighter, as if the soldier nodded from beyond. The trail was quiet, the echo at peace. Its call answered. Owen's life changed. His hikes now a dialogue with the past, his heart open to the unseen. The forest was his teacher, its lessons etched in courage. The soldier's echo was a gift, and Owen was its guardian. The shadow in the woods. The lake glimmered under the Italian sun, its surface alive with the churn of boats slicing through the water. Luca, 16 and brimming with adrenaline, stood among his friends, their laughter echoing as they prepared for the race. Me and my friend group around the same age as me all love one thing: sailing. The boat race was a thrill, but the real adventure came after, when they decided to camp by the lake's edge. Since it was a lake hosting the race, there was a lot of green campings nearby. Luca's friend, Marco, suggested they pitch tents in a secluded spot, a clearing nestled in a dense forest with a view of the water. My friend suggested that we spend the night, that we would have to sleep there anyway in one of the campings. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the trees seemed to close in, their shadows whispering secrets Luca couldn't hear. The clearing was perfect. Isolated, with the lake's gentle lapping as a backdrop. We brought our tents and sleeping mats, and we found the perfect spot, eventually kind of isolated, and with a beautiful view of the lake. The only access was a narrow dirt road, barely wide enough for their camper. The camping was more like an open space in a little forest, so we were surrounded by trees with the only way to get out, and in a narrow dirt road. The teens set up their tents while the adults claimed the camper, its bulk a reassuring presence. We parked the camper there, and us teens prepared for the sleep outside while the adult slept in the camper. The night was alive with their voices, the crackle of a fire, and the clink of soda cans. We had a ton of fun as well. Joking starting a fire. You know, all the things that you do on a camping trip. Luca downed Coke after Coke, the caffeine buzzing through him as the stars emerged. When it was time to sleep, the group retreated to their tents, the fire reduced to embers. When it was time to sleep, we all went into our tents and sort of drifted off into our dreams. Luca shared a tent with Marco, their sleeping mats side by side. Well, I hoped so for my friends, but not for me. I just couldn't sleep that night. The caffeine kept his eyes glued to the tent's ceiling, the forest's sounds amplifying in the dark as I stared at the tent ceiling, though I started to have this gut feeling that we weren't alone in there. A prickle of unease settled in his chest, the sense of being watched growing stronger, that there was something, or even worse, someone there with us. He tried to dismiss it, blaming the sugar and the isolation, but the feeling wouldn't fade. The night deepened, the air heavy with silence. Then, a sharp crack shattered the quiet, a branch snapping under weight. I heard a loud sound of a tree branch breaking. Luca's heart lurched, and Marco stirred beside him. I wasn't the only one who heard it too, as my friend who was in the tent with me suddenly woke up and whispered, "What was that?" Luca's voice was steady, though his pulse raced. I simply told him that it was probably an animal wandering around and broke a tree branch on the ground, as that often occurs in forests like this. He wanted to believe it, but Marco's wide eyes mirrored his doubt. As I was explaining this, though, my friend signed for me to shut up and listen. They froze, the sound of leaves crunching under deliberate steps echoing through the trees. It was then that we both heard footsteps. That's what ran through my mind as soon as I heard leaves and branches moving on the ground. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate, circling the clearing. Then, a piercing wail tore through the night, the camper's anti-theft alarm. We were suddenly woken up by the camper's anti-theft alarm going off. Luca and Marco scrambled to the tent's entrance, peering into the darkness. We all peeked out of our tents just to see a silhouette of a man running away in the woods. A figure, tall and shadowed, sprinted toward the trees, vanishing into the forest, and a crowbar near the camper's front right door. The metal glinted in the moonlight, abandoned by the camper's door. Thankfully, the alarm went off and scared the thief, because if that didn't happen, most likely all of our belongings that were inside the camper would have been stolen. Or, who knows, maybe something much worse. Luca's blood ran cold. The crowbar, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to danger. The alarm's wail faded, leaving only the rustle of the forest and the pounding of Luca's heart. The other teens emerged from their tents, their faces pale in the moonlight. The adults stumbled out of the camper, flashlights sweeping the clearing, but the intruder was gone. Luca and Marco exchanged a glance, the unspoken fear binding them. The crowbar lay where it had fallen, its presence a violation of the night's earlier joy. The adults checked the camper, finding scratches near the lock, but no damage beyond that. They urged everyone back to their tents, insisting it was just a petty thief. But Luca couldn't shake the image of that silhouette, its movements too deliberate, too predatory. Back in the tent, Luca lay awake, the forest's sounds now menacing. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, felt like the thief's return. Marco whispered theories. Maybe it was a local, desperate for cash, or someone who'd been watching them all day. Luca nodded, but his mind wandered darker paths. What if the thief hadn't just wanted their belongings? The isolation of the clearing, the narrow road, made them vulnerable. Trapped, he clutched his phone, its battery low, wishing for the comfort of home. Sleep eluded him, the night stretching into an eternity of vigilance. The next morning, the group packed in silence, the lake's beauty overshadowed by the previous night's terror. The adults reported the incident to the race organizers, who promised to alert local authorities. But Luca sensed their dismissal. A group of teens, a minor scare, nothing more. He scanned the tree line as they loaded the camper, half expecting to see the figure watching from the shadows. The crowbar was left behind, a grim souvenir of what could have been. The boat race felt like a lifetime ago as they drove away. The forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. Luca's friends were subdued, their usual banter replaced by uneasy glances. He wondered if the thief had targeted them specifically, or if they'd just been unlucky. The thought of someone lurking, waiting for the perfect moment, made his skin crawl. He checked his backpack obsessively, ensuring nothing was missing. But the violation lingered, a stain on the memory of the trip. Back home, Luca couldn't relax. He researched the lake, finding stories of petty thefts at nearby campsites, but nothing matched the menace of that silhouette. He confided in Marco, who admitted he'd heard the footsteps before the branch snapped, a detail that chilled Luca further. They agreed to avoid that lake in the future, the thrill of sailing tainted by the experience. Luca's parents noticed his unease, but he downplayed it, afraid they'd ban future trips. He kept a flashlight by his bed, its beam a small defense against the dark. The forest had changed Luca, its shadows following him into the city. He'd catch himself listening for footsteps in quiet moments, the crunch of leaves echoing in his mind. The camping trip, meant to be a celebration, had become a lesson in vulnerability. He wondered about the thief, where he was, what he'd wanted. The crowbar's image lingered, a symbol of a threat that hadn't fully materialized, but had come close enough to scar. Luca vowed to be more cautious, to trust his instincts. But the fear remained, a quiet companion in the nights that followed. The lantern's lure in the stillness of a rural night. A single glow can beckon or betray. The narrow, wooded road near Asheville stretched like a ribbon through the forest, its solitude a call for wanderers like Jasper. Driving with a friend, their laughter filled the car, the rural expanse a backdrop for memories. The road was theirs, its shadows a canvas of quiet adventure. But some lights lead to places unmeant for the living. Jasper steered steadily, the car humming along the old asphalt, when a faint glow appeared ahead, an anomaly in the darkened woods. The light grew brighter, a beacon in the night's embrace. Jasper slowed, curiosity mingling with unease, the forest's silence pressing close. He stopped 20 yards away, the object clear, a small rectangular lantern, its candle flickering, placed precisely in the road's center. No cars, no houses, only trees flanked the path, their branches whispering secrets. The glow was unnatural, its warmth a lie, stirring a primal dread in Jasper's chest. He and his friend stepped out, drawn to the lantern, their instincts screaming of a trap, yet their eyes locked on its flame. The air thickened, the forest holding its breath. They stood, hearts pounding, the lantern's light casting eerie shadows, its purpose a riddle. Both felt it, a sinking dread, a shared urge to flee, their voices uniting. "Let's get out of here!" They scrambled back to the car, the glow haunting their retreat. The road was empty, but Jasper's mirror held no answers, only darkness. They sped away, the lantern's lure a memory that burned, its intent unknown, but heavy with menace. Jasper's world shifted, the forest no longer a friend. The light was a call, and he'd answered, but at what cost? The night was alive, and Jasper was its fleeting guest. Jasper's car roared through the woods, the lantern's glow a specter in his mind. His friend's eyes darted to the rear view, seeking pursuers, but the road was empty, the forest a silent witness. They fled, hearts racing, the question echoing, "What was that?" The rural expanse, dotted with sparse homes, offered no clues, only the weight of their escape. Jasper's skepticism, once ironclad, wavered, the lantern a challenge to his rational world. The glow was no prank, its placement too deliberate, the woods too desolate for jest. He sought answers, digging into local lore, finding tales of lanterns luring travelers, spirits of lost wanderers, bound to the land, guiding the living to their doom. A name surfaced, Amos, a trapper lost to the woods, his lantern a beacon for the unwary. Jasper felt him, the spirit's sorrow a thread in the forest's weave, its light a plea or a snare. He spoke to elders, who warned of the road's curse, urging respect for its ghosts. The lantern was a warning, and Jasper had heeded it. His instincts, his salvation. He returned, placing a stone by the road, a gesture to honor Amos, the air softening as if the spirit sighed. The forest was quiet, the lure's power broken. Jasper's drives were now pilgrimages, his respect for the unseen a new compass. The lantern's glow was a memory, its lesson etched in his soul. He shared his story, not for answers, but for connection. His friend's silence a nod to their shared truth. The road was theirs, its shadows kind, its secrets honored. The lure was still, and Jasper was its servitor. The mirror stranger, the cigarette smoke curled in the crisp morning air as Sarah sat in the smoking section outside the doctor's office, the glass walls of the building gleaming like a mirror. I was at a doctor's office sitting outside in the smoking section. The spot was perfect, offering a clear view through the transparent doors and windows, straight to the other side of the lobby. It's the perfect spot to see inside the building as all doors and windows are very clear. You can completely see through to the other side of the building, in fact. Sarah exhaled, her eyes scanning the flow of patients and staff. It's very easy to see people coming and going from other side of the building while outside smoking. Then, a figure caught her attention, a woman. Stepping out, her silhouette eerily familiar. I happened to look up as I saw a lady leaving. Sarah's heart skipped, her cigarette trembling in her hand. The woman was her, or nearly so. The woman's profile was a perfect match. Same build, same posture, but her hair was longer, cascading past her shoulders. I never saw her full face, and because of that, this is why I keep telling myself that it was just someone who looked similar. But from what I saw, she looked exactly like me. It was Sarah's hair before she'd cut it weeks ago. The difference was that her hair was longer, which ironically looks just like mine, except I recently mowed it. But what stopped Sarah cold was the sweater. Her sweater, a unique knit she'd never seen anyone else wear. She also had a sweater that I've never seen anyone own nor wear. I wasn't wearing it that day, but it was mine. She'd almost worn it that morning. I even remember contemplating wearing it that very day. The woman vanished around the corner, her steps quick, purposeful. Sarah's pulse raced, her mind scrambling for logic. I was honestly so caught off guard that I sat in a state of shock for several seconds, maybe even a good minute. She urged herself to run after the woman, to see her face, to demand answers, trying to tell myself to get up and go to the other side and see who this lady was, or meet her or something. But a chilling certainty held her back. She knew. Somehow, that the woman would be gone. I had the funniest feeling that even if I ran with all my might, she would be gone by the time that I turned the corner outside. She kept her eyes fixed on the parking lot, waiting for a car, a sign, anything. I kept my eyes locked for several more minutes. She was already gone. Though walking towards the parking lot area, nothing appeared. No woman, no vehicle, just empty asphalt. I sat though for a half an hour watching and I never saw her. Never saw a vehicle drive by. That could have been her. Nothing. Sarah tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to coincidence, a look-alike with a similar sweater. I stared, waiting to see a car drive by the parking lot on the other side. I guess it was my way of confirming to myself that it was just another person, nothing really weird. But the unease lingered, a splinter in her mind. She went through her appointment, her thoughts elsewhere, the woman's image looping in her head. That night, the strangeness deepened. My husband and I had our date night kids with his parents for the night. She and Tom stayed in, drinking wine and watching Netflix. The house quiet without their kids. We were just drinking and watching One Piece on Netflix at home. But what happened next turned her unease into fear. A puzzle with no solution. Sarah, tipsy from the wine, took their dogs out to the backyard. At some point in my drunk state, I went to take the dogs outside to the bathroom. She lingered outside, then sprawled on the cool laundry room floor, the dogs scampering back to Tom. I waited until they came in. Dogs ran into the living room with the hubby, and I decided to lay down in the laundry room on the floor. When she returned to the living room, Tom's confusion stopped her cold. What's weird, though, is when I came back, my husband swore that I went to the bathroom and came from that direction. He insisted she'd walked in from the hallway, not the back door. I started giggling, thinking that he was pulling my leg or something, and I said no. I just brought the dogs in. I was laying down in the laundry room for a few minutes. Sarah laughed it off, but Tom's certainty unnerved her. The discrepancy gnawed at Sarah, her laughter fading. We both end up going through our camera footage, as we have cams in and outside of the home. They pulled up the security footage, hoping for clarity. There is video of me going and coming from the bathroom area. The tape showed Sarah, or someone identical, moving through the hallway, but nothing of her in the laundry room. It didn't capture me going to the laundry room. An odd blank recording coincided with her time on the floor, showing nothing. There was an extra recording of nothing, which I said was when I was on the floor, unfortunately. You don't see or hear me there. Tom swore she'd been in the living room with him, watching TV. My husband said that I was in the room with him, and I said that that was the time that I was in the laundry room. The dog's return was captured, but Sarah's absence wasn't. We even see where the dogs were coming in from, and it freaked us out. They replayed the footage, trying to align the timeline. We kept trying to figure out the time frame of everything, thinking that maybe I drank more than I thought, and I'm just getting my time mixed up. Sarah questioned her memory, the wine clouding her recall, but the video was undeniable. Someone had walked from the bathroom while she was elsewhere. We got tired, though, as it was late, trying to figure out it, and in the end, we just headed to bed. As they climbed into bed, the house erupted in chaos. As we did, both of our dogs went off barking in the living room and near the front door. Their pit bull, Luna, was ferocious, her barks reserved for real threats. Really, the only time that they do this is if someone is walking up or on the property where. My pit is very good at knowing someone coming up into the land before they even get to the driveway. Sarah bolted to the door. Tom closed behind. So naturally, I run to the door, and my husband runs behind me to the door, and we go out to the porch. The porch was empty. The night still. There's just nothing there. Luna's barks had been so certain, so urgent. It was freaky though, because she really never barks unless there was actually somebody there. They'd once caught a trespasser thanks to her. Luna's instincts razor sharp. We actually caught someone trying to jump our fence once, thanks to her. In fact, my husband caught them as they were walking toward it because of her notifying us. They locked the house and returned to bed. Uneasy. We ended up locking everything up, and we went to bed. But the peace was short-lived, only for it to happen again, just as we lied in bed. Both dogs go off and run to the front door. Tom grabbed his gun. Luna and their other dog, Max, already at the door. This time, my husband gets his gun and goes walking outside with the dogs. Sarah followed, her heart pounding as they stepped into the yard. One was just searching and sniffing, and our pit kept standing still by the door as if guarding it. Luna stood rigid, her low growls aimed at the darkness, giving gruffs under her breath, almost as if she was saying, "I know you're out there." Her eyes fixed on something unseen, her body tense. She kept looking for someone or something, but she never took off. Max sniffed the grass, but Luna's focus was unwavering. In the end, we found nothing. Neither did the dogs. Tom suggested it was a stray animal. Luna's hearing too keen. My hubby chalked it up to being random animals, and her just having really good hearing. But Sarah wasn't convinced. I'm getting paranoid. I guess I'm hoping people will tell me that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here. But I don't know. Something tells me that I'm not. The woman at the doctor's office haunted Sarah's thoughts, her sweater a detail too precise to dismiss. She began noticing oddities, her keys misplaced, a shadow in the hallway that vanished when she turned. She checked the cameras daily, finding nothing but feeling watched. Tom grew quiet, his skepticism fraying as Luna's barks became a nightly ritual. Sarah researched doppelgangers, finding tales of doubles as omens, or worse. The stories varied, but the fear was universal. Seeing your own face on another was a violation, a crack in reality. She wondered if the woman was still out there, wearing her sweater, walking her paths. Sarah stopped smoking outside, avoiding the doctor's office altogether. She kept the laundry room door locked. The memory of that night too vivid. Luna's growls echoed in her dreams, the woman's silhouette blending with her own. She told a friend, who laughed it off, but the dismissal only deepened her dread. The cameras offered no answers, their blind spots a growing threat. Sarah clung to Tom's presence, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house, once a haven, felt like a stage for an unseen actor, its script unknown but menacing. The stranger's gaze. In the heart of a shadowed forest, a stranger's voice can weave a spell or a snare. The remote forest stretched endlessly, its dense canopy a haven for wanderers seeking solitude. For Nora and her partner, Eli, the campsite was a retreat, a place to forge memories under the stars. The road wound deeper, the world fading behind them. But some places hold watchers who never rest. They arrived at the forest's edge, glimpsing two men on rocks, their presence odd but fleeting, dismissed as they drove deeper to set up camp. The campsite was the last on the road, isolated by miles of untamed woods. Nora and Eli pitched their tent, the forest's hush a balm to their souls, the air rich with pine. Darkness fell, and a voice broke the silence. A man, one of the two, calling hello from the shadows. Eli answered, cautious, as the man approached, requesting to pass through to reach the creek beyond. His eyes glinted, his tone too deliberate, stirring unease in Nora's chest. He circled their car, pausing when he saw Nora, his questions strange, probing, unrelated to the creek. The man crossed the creek, vanishing into the bushes, his flashlight extinguished. Eli stood at the bank, locking eyes with the stranger, who stared back, unyielding, a silent challenge. The gaze held for moments, unbroken, until the man turned, fading into the night. Nora's heart raced, the forest no longer safe, its stillness a mask for hidden intent. There was no trail, no campsite beyond the creek, only darkness. They packed swiftly, fleeing the sight. The stranger's gaze a weight they couldn't shake. The road stretched on, the forest a labyrinth of secrets. Nora and Eli were bound by their escape, but the man's purpose lingered, a riddle in the night. The stranger's gaze was a warning, and they were its fleeting prey. Nora's hands gripped the wheel, Eli's eyes scanning the rear view, the forest's darkness swallowing their retreat. The stranger's gaze burned in their minds, his questions about Nora's past, her fears, too personal, too wrong. They spoke little, the shared dread a bond, the question unspoken. Where was the second man? No vehicles, no campers marked the road. The forest eerily empty. Nora's instincts screamed of a trap. The creek a boundary to nowhere. The absence of trails beyond confirmed it. Nothing lay where the man had gone. Back home, Nora sought answers, delving into the forest's lore. Tales surfaced of a ritual, ancient and guarded, where figures lured travelers to test their worth. The men were keepers, their gaze a judgment, tied to a pact with the forest's spirits. Nora learned of a guardian, Amos, whose lantern once guided lost souls, now twisted to ensnare the unwary. The stranger was no man, but an echo, his questions a probe of their hearts. Nora and Eli had passed, their flight a sign of respect, sparing them the forest's wrath. They returned, placing an offering, a carved twig, at the creek's edge, honoring the forest's keepers. The air softened, the woods alive but kind, their pact unbroken. The campsite was theirs again. The stranger's gaze a memory, its lesson clear. Nora and Eli grew closer, their bond forged in fear. Their respect for the wild deepened. The forest was a teacher, its secrets a gift. The stranger's gaze was still, and they were its survivors. The lost hours. The cabin's wooden porch creaked under Sophie's sneakers, the pre-dawn air sharp with the scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. At 8, she was the eldest of her brothers, Liam, 7, and Finn, 4, tasked with keeping them in line during their family's retreat to the castle, their cabin by the Wangala Dam in New South Wales. 4 times a year, we spend time as a family in a cabin that we own that we call the castle. The dam's still waters reflected the hills, but today, Sophie felt a restless pull, a spark of rebellion. The castle sits at a man-made dam named Wangala in New South Wales, Australia. Their strict rules, no straying past the valley or the hills, felt stifling. My brothers and I, we always had the same rules to follow. Growing up, we couldn't go past the valley at the bottom of the castle, or past the hills that the castle sat between. But this morning, with the adults still asleep, Sophie decided they'd break those rules for an adventure. The sky was a soft gray as the siblings slipped out, their laughter muffled by the vastness of the outback. My brothers and I were up dressed and playing Bob the Builder cones and ladders. Their Nan had shooed them outside. Grumbling about their noise, Nan was complaining about us waking her up and told us to go and play, but to be back for breakfast. Sophie, emboldened by her role as big sister, proposed a daring plan. climb the hill across the valley to watch the sunrise. Being the big sister, my job was to watch my little brothers and to make sure that we followed the rules. But for some reason this day, we thought that it would be cool to walk past the valley and up the hill on the other side, to stand up the top and watch the sun come up over the water of the dam. She checked her wristwatch, confident they'd be back in time. I confidently decided that we could watch the sun come up and be back in time for breakfast. They set off, the dirt road their guide, unaware that time itself was about to betray them. The path was familiar, the valley's edge a clear line below the castle. If we stayed on the road that went over the valley, then we could be seen from the castle at all times if someone was to look for us. The siblings reached the hill's crest, the dam glowing gold as the sun peeked over the horizon. We made it to the top of the hill. The sun was coming up and everything was great. They lingered only 10 minutes, Sophie's watch ticking steadily. We were up there no more than 10 minutes, and according to the wristwatch that I had, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. They started back, the valley's depths calling to their childish curiosity. We reached the valley. We stopped to look into it for about a minute. We can see the bottom clear as day. Why not explore it? Decided, as most young kids would, to adventure down the valley and back up the other side. They descended, zigzagging through thorns and spiky grass, the world theirs for the taking. The valley's floor was cool, the air still. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I again checked the time, and it was roughly 6:15. Sophie glanced up, spotting Nan at the valley's edge, her familiar silhouette a comfort. We looked up the other side, and to our surprise, our Nan was standing on the edge of the valley. She waved, a gentle smile on her face. She waved down at us. We thought that we were going to get yelled at, but she just sort of smiled and walked away, relieved. They thought they'd escaped trouble. We thought that we were in the clear. They climbed back up, laughing and chattering, the ascent easier than expected. We were laughing and talking about whatever kids talk about. But as they stepped onto the road, Nan's figure appeared again, this time frantic, her voice a raw edge of panic. Nan came screaming at us from the castle. She was demanding to know where we had been. Sophie's stomach dropped, her brothers' faces mirroring her confusion. I looked at my brothers and back at her before pointing at the valley, too scared to speak. Nan's arms enveloped them, her sobs shaking Sophie to her core. Nan pulled us all into a hug and started crying. She ushered them to the car, her words a jumble of fear and relief. She started yelling at us that we needed to get into the car so that we could go find our pop parents and uncles. Apparently they were all out searching for us. Inside, Sophie glimpsed the dashboard clock. 700 p.m., the sun setting, not rising. It wasn't until we were all seated in the car that I spotted the time on the dash. Apparently, it was now 700 p.m., and rather than the sun rising, it was setting. Her watch confirmed it, the hands inexplicably aligned. I looked down at my watch, and sure enough, it showed the same time. The hour they'd spent was gone, swallowed by a day that shouldn't have been. The car's engine hummed as Nan drove, her hands trembling on the wheel. Sophie clutched Liam's hand, Finn's small form pressed against her. I remember showing it to my 7-year-old brother, who was just as confused as I was. Their adventure, a mere hour by their reckoning, had stretched into a 12-hour nightmare for their family. My brother, who was 7 at the time, agrees with me that we weren't gone for more than an hour. We couldn't have been. Nan's tears had dried, but her voice was sharp, recounting how she'd stayed at the castle, waiting. Nan never left the castle for fear that we'd come back and no one would be there. Yet she swore she hadn't seen them, hadn't waved, We swear that our Nan looked straight at us and even waved to us, but she swore up until her death that she never saw us that day. Sophie's mind reeled. What had they seen? The family reunited at the ranger station, their parents' faces etched with exhaustion and relief. Apparently, they were all out searching for us. Their mother had scoured the castle, their hideout, calling their names to no avail. Mom had gotten up at around 6:30 when she realized that my brothers and I were being too quiet. She looked around the castle, and in our little hideout, she even apparently called out to us with no answer. She'd rallied the others, sparking a frantic search. She then woke everyone up to help her search. Dad had combed the hills, popped the four-wheel drive tracks, while their uncles, less helpfully, had wandered to the caravan park for food and drinks. My uncles offered to check the other cabins, the caravan park, and the boat shed. In reality, they went to fish and chip in the caravan park, and then to the next town over to get some ice cream and beer. Their casual dismissal stung, but Nan's terror was what haunted Sophie. Because we were her precious grandkids, she was beyond terrified. Sophie and Liam recounted their story. The valley, the sunrise, the wave from Nan. Their parents listened, puzzled, insisting the valley had been searched. Mom and Dad both swear that they looked in the valley, and they never saw us. The terrain was open, visibility clear. How had they been missed? None of them could figure out how that we could have been hidden from sight there. Sophie's watch, their only anchor, matched the impossible time. The family returned to the castle, the day's joy erased by a mystery no one could unravel. Sophie lay awake that night, the dam's waters glinting outside, wondering if they'd slipped through time itself, or if something else had pulled them away. Years later, the incident remained a family legend, resurfacing at Nan's funeral. February last year, our Nan passed rather unexpectedly, and at her funeral, my dad asked if we remember the day that we disappeared. Dad's half-joke about Nan's love for her grandkids hid a deeper unease. He even joked about if it was him and our uncle that he'd bet his last dollar that she wouldn't have cared. Finn, too young to remember, was clueless. But Sophie and Liam nodded, their memories vivid. My youngest brother had no clue what we were talking about, but my other brother and I, we remembered. Dad shared the adult's perspective, revealing Nan's unwavering vigil. He told us that no one, not even Nan, had seen us that day. The valley, he said, was too open to hide 3 children. Even by some chance, if we were hidden from sight, we definitely would have been heard. Sophie and her brothers revisited the valley as adults, their steps heavier with memory. Since last year, too, my brothers have been to investigate Valley, and even Dad went. And they had a good look. The path was as they remembered, clear, navigable, no more than 30 minutes to cross. We've walked it plenty of times since, and it's only taken us about 30 minutes at most to do it. They tested the acoustics, Liam's voice carrying easily from the bottom. Our youngest brother said that even when our other brother was down in the valley, that he could hear him clear as day talking. Hiding was impossible, yet they'd vanished. There was no way that it could have taken us all safe to walk back up the other side of the valley. The figure of Nan, waving from the edge, was the deepest enigma. The creepiest thing about this whole thing is, well, who did we see if it wasn't Nan? Because it sure as heck looked exactly like her. The siblings scoured local lore, finding whispers of strange occurrences at Wangala, hikers losing hours, compasses spinning wildly. None matched their experience, but the pattern was unsettling. Sophie wondered if the dam, man-made and vast, held secrets in its depths, bending time for those who strayed too far. She dreamt of the valley, its thorns sharper, the figure of Nan fading into mist. The watch she'd worn that day was long gone, but its ticking haunted her, a reminder of hours stolen without trace. She avoided the castle now, its walls too full of questions. The family never returned as a unit. The incident, a silent fracture. Sophie shared the story sparingly, bracing for skepticism, but Liam's agreement gave it weight. They'd seen Nan, or something wearing her face. The valley remained unchanged, its openness mocking their loss. Sophie kept a journal, detailing every moment, hoping to pin down the truth. But the lost hours slipped through her grasp, a glitch in time that left her scanning the horizon, wondering if the figure was still out there, waiting for them to wander again. The shadow in the aisle. In the glow of a bustling store, innocence can draw a predator's eye. The Michael's Craft Store was a wonderland for young Lila, a place where her dreams took shape in beads and wire. Living with her grandparents, her world was small but bright. Her grandmother's jewelry making a cherished bond. The store's aisles were a maze of possibility, each visit a treasure hunt. But some treasures hide dangers unseen. Lila and her grandmother crafted together, their trips to Michael's a ritual, until one day they needed wire for a bracelet, and Lila was sent in alone. The store's warmth enveloped her, its displays sparkling with promise. Lila, fiercely independent, felt grown up. Her grandmother waiting in the car, parked close. The storefront's light spilled out, guiding her in. But a shadow crossed her path. A man, tall, in black, his hoodie marked with a red D1 logo. He moved with purpose, his hands buried in pockets, his gaze lingering too long as he passed. Lila's heart stirred, unease prickling, but she dismissed it. Drawn to the Christmas decor, she stood, entranced, unaware of his eyes, his frantic steps echoing deeper into the store. The wire was her mission, but the toy aisle beckoned, a child's temptation. She wandered, unaware of the man's return, his presence a creeping chill. He followed, appearing at aisle ends, muttering as if to her, his words a lure she didn't yet fear. Lila moved on, reasoning he was harmless, her young mind blind to the threat. The store was alive, its hum masking the danger, but the air grew heavy. Lila's innocence was her shield, but the shadow in the aisle was closing in. Her steps quickened, the wire clutched tight, the store no longer safe. The man's gaze was a chain, and Lila was its unwitting captive. The craft store was a trap, and she was its prey. Lila's heart pounded as she navigated the aisles, the wire a lifeline in her hand. The man's muttering followed, his shadow a constant at the edge of her vision. She darted to the wedding aisle, hoping distance would shake him, but the chilling dread returned. He was there, behind her, his back turned, his hands moving in a vile act. The sight froze her, her child's mind struggling to grasp the horror, his sunken eyes meeting hers, a predator's stare. Terror surged, shattering her naivety, her legs carrying her out, the store a blur. She fled to the car, leaping in, her grandmother startled by her panic, asking what she'd bought. Lila stammered, the words tumbling out. But the man emerged, his figure framed in the sliding doors. Her breath caught, dread coiling as he approached, his intent clear. He knocked on the window, accusing her of theft, his crazy stare fixed, twisting her fear into guilt. Her grandmother, sensing the danger, cracked the window, her voice firm, demanding he back away. The man's facade broke, his hands yanking the door, then pounding the roof. a violent roar that sent Lila to tears. Her grandmother locked the doors, reversed, and sped away, the wire unpaid for, a $17 relic of their escape. The car was a sanctuary, the road a path to safety. But the man's eyes haunted Lila. Her grandmother's quick thinking had saved them, but the store was now a place of shadows. They called the police, who acted swiftly, pulling tapes, tracking the man with a history of violence. Lila's world shifted, her innocence scarred, but her family's love held firm. The store's glitter was gone, replaced by a lesson in vigilance. The shadow in the aisle was a predator, but Lila was its survivor. Lila's escape was a fracture in her childhood. The Michaels, a place she'd never see the same. Her grandmother's arms were her refuge, the wire a reminder of the danger they'd fled. The police investigation spared her further trauma, but her grandmother shared that the man was caught, his record dark with assault, one against a young relative. Lila learned he'd watched from the gas station, targeting her solitude. A predator in plain sight. The revelation chilled her. The store's aisles now a maze of hidden threats. Her family rallied, their love a shield, the dented car repaired. But the memory lingered. Nora dug deeper, her grandmother's tales hinting at a network. Men like him, preying on the vulnerable in quiet stores. Local whispers spoke of others, their crimes cloaked in normalcy, their targets often children. Lila's story joined theirs, a warning to the unwary, her courage a spark in the dark. She returned to crafting, but never alone. Her independence tempered by caution. The store was a lesson, its glitter a facade for the shadows within. Lila's fear became strength, her grandmother's vigilance a guide. The house was a haven, the wire a relic of survival. Lila grew, her bond with her grandmother a fortress, their jewelry a defiance of fear. The shadow in the aisle was a memory, its power broken by their escape. Lila shared her story, not for pity, but for power, her voice a light against the dark. The world was vast, its dangers real, but Lila was ready. The predator was gone, and she was whole. Lila's life was reshaped. The Michaels incident a pivot from innocence to awareness. She crafted still, each bead a reclaiming of joy, her grandmother's hands guiding hers. The store was a ghost, but Lila was its conqueror, her story a testament to survival. She connected with others, survivors of similar shadows, their voices a chorus of strength. The network of predators was real, but so was the network of those who fought back. Lila's courage grew, her family's love a beacon, the wire a symbol of her defiance. She explored the world, cautious but bold, her eyes open to its dangers and wonders. The store's aisles were a memory, but Lila's spirit was unbound, her grandmother's wisdom a compass. The shadow in the aisle was a lesson, its echo a call to resilience. Lila lived fully, her heart unbowed. The craft store, a chapter closed. The forest of her childhood was vast, but she was its navigator. The stranger's threat was still, and Lila was its victor. Under the stars, Lila stood, her creation sparkling, her family near. The night was hers, its shadows kind, its secrets shared. The light of resilience was hers, and she was free. The marked house. The new house was supposed to be a fresh start, a sanctuary after years of torment. But as Emma locked the door behind her, the weight of her past clung like damp air. I dated this man for about 2.5 years, and well, he nearly killed me very physically. Abusive emotionally, sexually, all of it. Her ex, Caleb, had left scars, some visible, others buried deep. The last time that he hurt me was because I told him that I was moving and I was going to have a roommate. The news had ignited his rage, his hands closing around her throat, his fists striking her face. He strangled me twice and punched me in the face. She'd escaped, her trembling fingers dialing 911, and Caleb was arrested. I escaped and called the cops, and he got arrested a few days later. Thankfully, but his shadow lingered, a threat that refused to fade. Before his arrest, Caleb had manipulated her, weaving lies to protect himself. He was coaching me on how I needed to go back to law enforcement and state that I hit myself, and he didn't really strangle me. He'd claimed she was unmedicated, spiraling into a psychotic break, that I stopped taking my psychiatric medication and was just having a psychotic break that night. Emma, broken and afraid, had echoed his words at the first hearing. At the first hearing, I recanted and told the judge all the lies my ex had told me to. The judge believed her, and Caleb's release loomed. The judge believed me, and he was said to get released from jail. But clarity cut through her fear, and she returned to the police, telling the truth. I went back to law enforcement after gaining some clarity and told them the truth again, in which another hearing was scheduled. That decision marked her house and her life for danger. Caleb wasn't just an abuser. He was a gang member, tied to a network that thrived on fear. He was a gang member. Obviously, I will not be saying which one, but it wasn't a good one. Emma had made a fatal mistake, revealing her new address during a moment of weakness. Before he got arrested, he asked me where I was moving, and I told him which street corner the house was on, very stupidly, I know. Her new home, shared with her roommate, Lauren, was now a target. By now, I had moved into my new house with my roommate. Lauren's boyfriend, Jake, was entangled in the same underworld, and he brought chilling news. My roommate's boyfriend at the time was affiliated as well. The gang had marked Emma's house, a warning etched in their actions. He was apparently notified that my house had been marked by the gang my ex belonged to, and that in the end proved true. The first sign came at dawn, the sky a bruise of gray. One morning, my roommate and her boyfriend were sitting in the driveway in her car, with the lights off. Emma slept inside, unaware of the threat creeping closer. I was inside the house asleep. A car rolled up, blocking the driveway, its engine idling with menace. A car pulled up in front of my house, blocking the driveway, preventing my roommate from pulling a car out. Minutes passed before a man emerged, striding toward the porch. The mystery car, though, sat blocking the driveway for a few minutes before a man got out of the passenger seat and began walking directly up the driveway to my porch. Jake, armed and alert, stepped out, flashing his gun. Luckily, my roommate's boyfriend had a gun on him, and once he saw the man walking towards the front door, he got out of my roommate's car and flashed his gun at the man. The intruder fled, the car speeding into the dawn. The man saw it and ran back to the car, which then sped off. Emma woke to Lauren's frantic recounting, her heart sinking as she realized the gang's reach. The house, her refuge, was no longer safe. She installed new locks, checked the windows obsessively, but the fear was a constant companion. We're still unsure whether or not these people initially knew that there were people sitting in my roommate's car or not. The incident felt like a warning, a prelude to something worse. Emma's days blurred into vigilance, her nights sleepless, the memory of Caleb's hands on her throat mingling with the new threat outside her door. She wondered if she'd ever escape his shadow, or if the gang would ensure she never did. The threats escalated, each one bolder, more invasive. Emma drove to a gas station one evening, the neon lights a stark contrast to the darkness beyond. I had driven to the gas station a few streets over after the sun had gone down. As she walked to her car, a familiar vehicle pulled up, its driver shouting something unintelligible. A man in the same car that was in front of my house pulled up next to me and started yelling something. Emma, mistaking it for harassment, snapped back. I just yelled back, "Shut up and leave me alone," thinking at the time that I was just randomly being catcalled. But as she pulled out, the car blocked her exit, forcing her to swerve through another. I got in my car and went to pull out of the gas station, noticing his car was sitting in front of the exit that I was going to take, and he wasn't moving. She glanced in her rearview mirror, her pulse spiking. I looked behind me and saw him following me. He waited for me to leave before he pulled out behind me and followed me. Emma wove through side streets, her hands trembling on the wheel. I started going down different streets, and he kept tailing. Panic surged as she accelerated, making a sharp turn that finally lost him. Eventually, I freaked out, and I sped up real fast and made a quick, impulsive turn that threw him off my track. She didn't go home that night, crashing at a friend's, her mind racing with the image of that car, its intent unmistakable. That day, I didn't go home. The gang was watching, waiting, and her new address was no secret. She returned the next day, her eyes scanning every shadow, every passing vehicle for signs of pursuit. The house itself became a battleground. Emma came home from work to find the dining room window tampered with, its screen torn away. I came home from work and saw that the window in our dining room that looks out to the backyard, the only window on the first story that doesn't have iron bars guarding it from the inside, it had been tampered with from the outside. The effort required to remove it was chilling. The screen had been ripped off. We reattached it and tried to rip it off ourselves. And it was really hard to do that. Would have taken a lot of effort to get that screen off. She and Lauren reinforced it, but the violation lingered, a reminder of their vulnerability. Emma slept with a knife under her pillow, her trust in the house's walls shattered. The final incident came weeks later, as Jake and a friend returned from a walk. My roommate's boyfriend and his friend had left our house to go on a walk. They spotted two men peering through the dining room window, their faces pressed to the glass. They saw two men peeking through the other dining room window trying to see inside. Jake's shouts sent them scrambling. They noticed my roommate's boyfriend as he started yelling at them, asking what the heck they were doing, and they just scurried away. Emma's blood ran cold when she heard, the gang's persistence a noose tightening around her life. She avoided being home alone, her days a cycle of work and dread, her nights haunted by the thought of who might be outside. The final hearing brought relief, if not peace. Me and my ex's final hearing happened, and I've gotten him locked up until 2036. Caleb's sentence stretched to 2036, a barrier between Emma and his violence. I think that maybe his fellow gangbangers have realized that a man locked up for the next 12 years is not worth risking their freedom over anymore. The gang's threats ceased, their interest waning with Caleb's imprisonment. I have since seemingly been left alone. But Emma's scars, physical and emotional, remained. She moved again, leaving the marked house behind, its windows and driveway etched in her memory. Emma's new life was cautious, her trust fractured. She installed cameras, kept her address private, and avoided late-night errands. The gang's shadow lingered, a reminder of how close she'd come to something worse. She shared her story with a therapist, the words a release, but the fear was a quiet companion. The house, once a symbol of freedom, had become a cage, its walls unable to shield her from Caleb's reach. Emma rebuilt, step by step. But the memory of that car, that window, those men stayed with her, a warning to never let her guard down again. The shadows of the arch, in the heart of a quiet town. A child's haven can harbor secrets darker than dusk. The small Midwest town was a tapestry of close-knit families, where backyards wove neighbors' lives together. For young Ilara, her world was her home, her grandparents' corner lot, and the elderly neighbor's garden, a trio of yards linked by love. The air was warm, the streets safe, a child's paradise. But some gardens grow shadows that no light can banish. Ilara's family lived near her grandparents. Their yards joined, but a pool fence forced a path through her grandparents' yard and a garden arch to reach the neighbors. Her neighbor, Ms. Clara, was her confidant. Their bond forged in gardening and crafts. They'd sit on Clara's couch, Ilara reading comics aloud, her voice a gift to the widow's quiet days. The town was peaceful, its people kind. No hint of darkness until a single moment shattered the calm. Ilara's days were filled with joy, her grandmother's beads and Ms. Clara's roses her treasures. But peace is fragile, and the yards held secrets beneath their blooms. One day, Ilara sat with her mother in the kitchen, the back door open, a breeze cooling the heat, when her brother, Owen, stumbled in, pale and trembling, tears streaking his face. Owen, older and stronger, was shaken, his eyes wide with fear. Ilara watched, her book forgotten, as he spoke of voices, shadows, and footsteps in Ms. Clara's yard, where he'd mowed the grass. He stood in the doorway, sobbing, his words a torrent of unseen horrors, his mother rushing to hold him. The kitchen, once a haven, felt small, the breeze now a whisper of dread. Ilara's curiosity burned, her child's bravery outweighing fear. She stepped out, crossing the brick path to the arch, her heart set on answers. The yards were her playground, but the arch was a threshold. Ilara's steps were bold, but the air beyond was waiting, heavy with secrets. The shadows of the arch were calling, and she was their unwitting guest. Ilara's feet carried her through the familiar path, the fence a guide to the arch. The sun was high, the day bright. But the moment she passed under the wooden vines, her world shifted. The air grew dense, a wave of nausea doubling her over, as if struck in the gut without a blow. The garden, once a place of roses, was charged, the air buzzing like static on a screen, every atom alive and moving. Her skin prickled, her breath shallow, the yard no longer hers. Footsteps echoed, soft thuds vibrating the earth, paired with a mocking laugh from the treetops, a single voice splitting across the sky. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, lingering until she focused, then vanishing. The oaks, ancient and vast, trembled, their branches shaking without wind, a chorus of rattlesnake tales. The laughter grew shrill, the footsteps heavier, the shadows bolder, formless but relentless. Ilara clutched her stomach, fear clawing her heart, but curiosity held her fast. The garden was alive, its pulse a warning, its air a cage of charged particles. She stood, trembling, as 4 tall figures emerged, black, cloaked, 7 feet high, gliding without steps, their faceless gazes fixed on her. The figures floated, their edges sharp against the day, vanishing one by one into nothing. Ilara ran, the arch her salvation, the fence her guide, her breath a prayer. She burst into the kitchen, spilling her tale to her mother, who urged silence to spare Owen's fragile state. The house was a refuge, but the garden's curse lingered in her bones. Ilara's world had cracked. The yard's no longer safe. Their secrets a weight she carried. The shadows of the arch were real, and Ilara was their witness. Ilara's life changed. The garden's curse, a shadow that followed her. The house, the yards, the town, all felt altered, their warmth tainted by the unseen. The events grew frequent, the static air and gliding shadows appearing weekly, sometimes daily. Unnoticed by others, she learned their rhythm, the unease a constant companion, yet fear dulled with familiarity. The shadows were formless, their presence like meeting a stranger with ill intent, their numbers growing. Ilara, curious, tested her power, focusing her mind to summon the static, the shadows trailing like moths to a flame. The act was reckless, her child's bravery a double-edged sword. She'd stare through a mental tunnel, the air crackling, the shadows dancing, then fade them with a blink. The control thrilled her, but the unease lingered, a reminder of their otherness. The town remained oblivious, her family untouched, Owen's fear a fading memory. Ilara's secret was hers alone, a burden and a gift, her connection to the shadows a mystery. She lived with them, their gliding forms a part of her world, until the night they surged. The playroom, a haven of noise and freedom, was her sanctuary. Ilara strummed her guitar, the new amplifier her pride, its volume a defiance of the dark. The knob turned itself, the sound dying, the air exploding with static, the room alive with over 50 shadows. They ignored her, gliding, melting, reappearing, their presence overwhelming. Ilara froze, her courage faltering, the room a cage of unseen eyes. The shadows of the arch were legion, and Ilara was their focus. The playroom pulsed, the shadows a swarm, their gliding forms a silent cacophony. Ilara's guitar was mute, her amplifier betrayed, the air a storm of charged atoms. A larger shadow moved, and she turned, seeing a spider, vast as a mattress, its formless bulk clinging to the wall, its head rotated, edges shifting, a mockery of anatomy, its gaze a weight on her soul. The room was no longer hers, the shadows no longer passive, their intent a creeping darkness. Ilara fled, the spider's stare chasing her up the hill, the darkness a tide in her mind. Her bedroom was her last refuge, the blanket a shield, her face buried in a pillow. The darkness pressed, a physical force, its cold seeping into her thoughts. She prayed, desperate, repeating, "Please, make it stop." Her voice a plea to the unknown. Light pierced her eyelids, startling her upright, but no source shone. The darkness returned, and she prayed again, the light growing, warm and comforting, a roar soft but fierce. The light peaked, blinding yet gentle, banishing the shadows, leaving only calm. Ilara sat, the room hers again, the air clear, the fear gone. The shadows had retreated, their curse broken, her prayer a key to freedom. The playroom was silent, the guitar untouched, the shadows of the arch a fading echo. Her heart was steady, her courage forged in light. The town slept, unaware of the battle won in the dark. The spider's stare was gone, and Ilara was its victor. Ilara's world was reborn, the shadows a memory she carried with care. The yards, the house, the town regained their warmth, but her eyes saw deeper, the unseen a part of her. She never summoned the static again. Her curiosity sated, her bravery tempered by wisdom. The garden arch stood quiet. Ms. Clara's roses blooming, the oaks still. Ilara's bond with her family grew, their love a shield against the dark she'd faced. She shared her tale sparingly, its weight a gift, a reminder of the light that saved her. She sought answers, digging into the town's lore, finding whisper of a ritual gone wrong, a curse bound to the land. The shadows were remnants, their forms a warning, their spider a guardian of the rift. Ilara's prayers had sealed it, her will a spark that closed the gate. The town remained untouched, her siblings free, her brother's fear a distant echo. She lived boldly, her heart open to the mysteries she'd touched. The shadows of the arch were history, and Ilara was their keeper. Her crafts with Ms. Clara continued, each bead a defiance of fear. The yards were hers, their secrets shared, their peace restored. The light was her ally, and she was its champion. Ilara's journey left her changed, the shadows a lens through which she saw the world. The Midwest town was her home, but its quiet hid depths she alone knew. She walked the yards with reverence, the arch a marker of her trial, its vines a testament to her survival. Ms. Clara's garden bloomed, her comics a memory of simpler days. Ilara's courage grew, her family's love a foundation, their ignorance a shield she cherished. She kept the shadows secret, their presence a lesson in the unseen. Local tales spoke of others, fleeting glimpses, charged air, but none as vivid as hers. Ilara listened, her experience a bridge to those who'd brushed the dark. The ritual's curse was old, its origins lost, but her light had broken its hold. She crafted still, her hand steady, her heart unbowed. The town was a tapestry, its threads woven with secrets she'd unraveled. The shadows of the arch were silent, and Ilara was their guardian. The breeze through the kitchen was warm again, the back door a portal to memory. Ilara's brother healed, his fear a scar she helped mend. The light had saved her, and she carried it forward, a beacon in the dark. Ilara's life was a dance with the unseen, her courage a flame that never dimmed. The yards were her kingdom, the arch a gate she'd crossed and closed. She honored Ms. Clara, her roses a tribute, the garden a place of peace. The town's quiet was her canvas, its secrets hers to keep. Her family stood by her, their love a fortress, their laughter a balm. The shadows had taught her, their curse a forge for her strength. She explored the world, her eyes sharp, her heart open to its wonders and dangers. The ritual's echo was faint, its guardians gone, the spider a memory. Ilara's prayers were her power, her will a shield against the dark. She shared her story with those who'd listen, a whisper of truth in a world of doubt. The Midwest was vast, its mysteries many, but Ilara was its navigator. The shadows of the arch were dust, and she was their conqueror. Her guitar rested, the playroom a haven once more. Ilara's light was her own, a gift she wielded with care. The darkness was gone, and she was free. Ilara's legacy was quiet, her story a ripple in the town's fabric. The yards bloomed, the arch stood, the shadows a tale for the brave. She lived with purpose, her crafts a defiance, her family a circle of light. The ritual's curse was a memory, its lessons etched in her soul. Ilara's heart was a beacon, her courage a guide for those lost in the dark. The light had embraced her, and she carried it forward, a flame against the night. She connected with others, their tales of shadows a mirror to her own. The town was a keeper of secrets, but Ilara was its voice, her story a bridge. The shadows of the arch were a chapter closed, their weight lifted by her will. The world was hers, its mysteries a call she answered with grace. The garden was a sanctuary, its roses a nod to Ms. Clara's love. The spider's form was a ghost, and Ilara was its master. The breeze was hers, the yards her home, the light her truth. Ilara stood tall, her family near, her heart unbound. The shadows were still, and she was their light. Ilara's path was her own, the shadows a memory she honored. The Midwest town was her route, its yards a map of her journey. She walked under the arch, its vines a crown, the garden a testament to her victory. The light was her companion, its warmth a constant, its roar a whisper of power. Her family was her strength, their love a tapestry woven with trust. The shadows of the arch were gone, and Ilara was their eternal dawn. She lived fully, her crafts a song, her story a gift to the world. The town slept, its secrets safe, its heart beating in her steps. The light was hers, and she was its keeper, a guardian of the unseen. Under the stars, Ilara stood, her eyes bright, her soul free. The darkness was a memory, and she was its conqueror. The shadows were silent, and Ilara was whole. The unseen lodger, the apartment's tin kitchen walls radiated cold, a chill that seeped into Anna's bones as she cradled her 1-year-old son, Tommy, in the dim light of dawn. At 17, a teen mother, she'd moved into the upstairs unit with her friend Lisa, a temporary home borrowed from a college friend. Sarah, who was away at school. One of my mom's friends rented an apartment, but she was away at college, so she allowed my mom and another one of her friends to live there while she was gone. The place was cramped, its walls thin, but it was theirs, for now. My mom and this other friend lived in the upstairs apartment along with my mom's 1-year-old baby, my older brother, and my mom was a teen mom, so would have been about 10 years old. Yet, from the moment they arrived, an unease settled over them, sharpest in the kitchen. The kitchen walls were made of tin, so it was always freezing cold. It wasn't just the cold, it was a feeling, heavy and wrong. Like eyes watching from the shadows, the kitchen became a place to avoid, its icy air a constant reminder of something amiss. They always felt uncomfortable around that side of the apartment too. Strange occurrences piled up, defying explanation. One night, Sarah's bedroom glowed, a fiery light pulsing through the door, unlike any bulb or flame. One time they saw their college friend's room looked like it was on fire. It was all lit up really strange, and was glowing unlike any light would create. Anna and Lisa stared, hearts pounding, but found no source, no heat, just an eerie radiance that faded by morning. Then came the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, climbing the stairs to their door. They would hear footsteps coming up the stairs to the house. They called the police repeatedly, their voices trembling, called the police 5 or 6 times to check the apartment. Each time, the officers found nothing, no footprints, no signs of intrusion. The police would come check the apartment and never really found anything. Desperate, Anna and Lisa turned to faith, reading Bible passages aloud in the dark. My mom and her friend began to suspect that it was a ghost, so they would read the Bible out loud. The words seemed to hush the footsteps, granting them fleeting peace, which made the footsteps stop, so they could finally get some sleep. But the relief was temporary. The apartment's secrets too deep to be silenced by scripture. One night, after another round of unseen steps, Lisa called her brother, a sheriff from a nearby town. My mom's friend called her brother, who happened to be a sheriff in a nearby town. He arrived with a colleague, their flashlights cutting through the apartment's gloom. Her brother brought a buddy over, and they came over to check the apartment following one of those episodes of footsteps. What they found turned Anna's blood to ice. A man living in the attic, hidden above their lives. The sheriff's discovery was chilling. Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Ethan, had made the attic his home. They found that the ex-boyfriend of the friend who was living at college had been living in the attic the whole time. He'd climbed a tree outside, slipping into Sarah's bedroom and through a closet hatch. They think that he'd been climbing a tree into their college friend's bedroom and getting up into the attic from her closet. Anna had met him once, a fleeting acquaintance whose odd behavior, awkward, disconnected, had left her uneasy. My mom somewhat knew this guy, and she had met him before and knew who he was, but they were just acquaintances. Now, the truth sank in. He'd been there for months, unseen, watching. He'd been living in that attic for the entire 6 months that my mom had lived there. His attic hideout was a makeshift room, complete with bedding and belongings, a silent invasion of their world. Anna's skin crawled at the thought of Ethan's eyes on her, on Tommy, through the ceiling's cracks. It's possible that he had been watching them, my brother as well, but they wouldn't have known the information since they never saw him. The footsteps, the glowing room, had he caused them, or was something else at play? He had an entire room set up in the attic too. Anna and Lisa packed their things, fleeing the apartment for a new home, desperate to escape its shadows. But Ethan's presence followed. He visited their new place with Sarah, his demeanor unsettling. He once came to visit my mom's new house along with the college friend. After he left, Anna found Tommy's room transformed. Bed, toy box, all rearranged in bizarre patterns. After he had left, my mom had discovered that while he was over at her house, he had rearranged my brother's furniture in really strange ways. The discovery of Ethan's attic lair shook Anna, but the apartment's strangeness lingered in her mind, too vivid to dismiss. My mom also believes that the house also had some kind of spirit there. The freezing kitchen, the unease that clung to its walls, felt like more than just Ethan's presence. Because of the freezing room's uneasy feelings, the glowing room, untouched by any natural light, defied logic. The unexplainable situations like the glowing room and the Bible's power over the footsteps suggested a force beyond a human intruder. Biblical words having an impact. Anna learned of the downstairs neighbor, a woman who neglected her children, locking them in their rooms, her cruelty seeping into the building's bones. Their downstairs neighbor had children who she hated and never wanted to raise. She would often neglect the kids and lock them in their bedrooms from the outside. The house seemed to hold that pain, a residual darkness fueling its mysteries. It's possible the entire house just had some residual negative energy from all of the absolute shenanigans. Ethan's story took a darker turn years later. Several years later, he apparently murdered an old lady by shoving her down some stairs in a shopping cart. His schizophrenia diagnosis explained his erratic behavior, but not the terror he'd inflicted. It was discovered that he had schizophrenia. Anna shuddered, imagining him above her, his mind unraveling as he watched her life unfold. The apartment's dual horrors, Ethan's stalking, and the house's eerie energy left her questioning what was real. Had his presence amplified the house's darkness? Or had the house drawn him in, a magnet for broken souls? She never returned. But the memory of those footsteps, that glow, stayed with her. a puzzle with no solution. Anna and Lisa rebuilt their lives, but the apartment's shadow lingered. Anna kept Tommy close, checking ceilings and closets in every new home. Her trust in quiet spaces fractured. She shared the story with her son years later. His infant days in that apartment a distant blur. The downstairs neighbors' neglect. Ethan's attic room. The glowing light. They wove a tapestry of dread Anna couldn't unravel. She wondered if the house still stood, if its new tenants felt the same chill, heard the same steps. The Bible verses she'd read became a ritual, a shield against unseen threats. Though she never knew if they'd truly worked, the apartment faded into memory, but its impact endured. Anna avoided old buildings, their attics too reminiscent of Ethan's hideout. She researched the house, finding no record of its history, but rumors of strange occurrences, lights, sounds, echoed in local lore. Lisa's brother, the sheriff, confirmed Ethan's arrest after the murder. His attic days a footnote in a tragic life. Anna's new home was brighter, safer, but she kept a flashlight by her bed, its beam a defense against the dark. Tommy grew up unaware of the eyes that might have watched him, but Anna carried that weight, a mother's instinct sharpened by fear. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, Anna would hear a creak and freeze, her mind flashing to the tin-walled kitchen, the glowing room. She'd check on Tommy, now a teenager, his room untouched by strange hands. The apartment was gone, replaced by newer buildings, but Anna wondered if its energy lingered, drawing others into its orbit. Thankfully, after that, the whole situation just sort of sorted itself out, which my mom was very thankful for. But the thought of Ethan, silent above her, was a chill she couldn't shake. It is creepy to think about someone like that. Just living in your house, and you're completely unaware that they're there. Her story was a warning, a reminder that some threats hide in plain sight. Their presence felt only in the echoes they leave behind. The house of lingering spirits in the quiet of a family home. The past can linger, its whispers louder than the living. The old house stood as a sentinel, its walls steeped in memories, some warm, others cold as the grave. For Lila, it was her world, a place where love and loss intertwined. Its rooms a canvas of her childhood. The air was heavy, the shadows deep, a tapestry of the unseen. Some houses hold more than memories. They hold those who never left. The house was a beacon for the strange, its halls alive with apparitions, stirred by the deaths of kin. When Lila was barely old enough to remember, Lila and her mother had seen them. Figures in the corners, fleeting but undeniable. The house was a crossroads, its spirits tethered by bonds unbroken, their presence a hum beneath the everyday. One evening, her uncle, a skeptic, scoffed at tales of ghosts, his voice sharp as he dismissed the unseen, only for a bulb above the dining table to shatter, its shards a rebuke to his doubt. The other bulbs stood firm, the explosion a message, the air crackling with intent. Lila's heart raced, her uncle's bravado shaken, the house asserting its truth. She lay beside her sister, comforting her after a nightmare, when a woman glided past the door, her eyes locking with Lila's before vanishing into the bathroom, leaving no trace of light. The house was alive, its spirits restless, their gazes a weight Lila felt in her bones. She'd grown with them, her intuition a guide through their silent world. The spirits were her kin, their presence a riddle she'd yet to solve. Lila's home was a paradox, its warmth shadowed by spirits who walked its halls. The woman in the hallway was a memory, her gaze a question Lila couldn't answer. The bathroom stayed dark, its silence a void. No family member claiming the visit. The upstairs space too far from their usual paths. Lila's intuition, sharp as a blade, warned her of the house's deeper truths. She lived with the unseen, their presence a constant, their intentions unclear, but never cruel. Years later, watching a movie alone, Lila saw a child's shadow at her door, its form small but heavy, fleeing when she called out. Her spine chilled, her instincts screaming not to follow, and she obeyed, the movie a fragile anchor. The house was quiet, but its silence was a mask, the spirits stirring in the dark. A loud crash echoed, unanswered by her sleeping family, and Lila, against her will, descended to find the source. The kitchen was still, but in its corner stood the boy, his form solid until the light banished him. Lila fled, her heart pounding, the house's pulse a warning she couldn't ignore. Morning revealed a scratch on her leg, long and precise, a mark of the boy's touch, its blood a silent accusation. The family acted, sagging and salting the house, their rituals a shield against the unseen. Lila learned their ways, her obsidian and evil eye a talisman, her salt a barrier. The spirits retreated, but their whispers lingered, a call Lila felt in her dreams. Lila's life was a dance with the lingering spirits, their presence a thread in her story. The house was a keeper of souls, its walls a bridge to those gone, their messages woven in light and shadow. She saged and salted, her necklace a ward, drawing lines across her door and sill, the rituals a rhythm she knew by heart. The boy returned, his shadow fleeting, but Lila was ready, her intuition a shield. She sought their truth, digging into the house's past, finding tales of her kin, loves lost, lives ended, their spirits bound by care. The woman was her aunt, the boy her cousin, their gazes a plea to be remembered, their marks a warning of dangers unseen. Lila spoke to them, her voice soft, offering peace, her prayers a bridge to their rest. The house softened, its air lighter, the spirit's presence a warmth, not a weight. They were her guardians, their warnings a gift, their scratches a call to listen. She lived with them, her family's love a foundation, their rituals a pact with the unseen. The house was hers, its spirits her kin, their bond eternal. The lingering spirits were still, and Lila was their keeper. Under the stars, Lila stood, the house her hearth, its shadows kind. The unseen was her truth, and she was its light. The house of lingering spirits was home, and she was whole. The Whispering Estate. The estate loomed at the end of a dirt road, its silhouette swallowed by the dense woods, the air heavy with the musk of swamp and decay. Ellie, barely out of high school, stepped onto the creaking porch, her babysitting job a mix of necessity and dread. The house was like a mile down a dirt road in the woods, past a swamp and old overgrown tennis courts with coyotes howling in the distance. The mansion was a relic, adorned with antiques, unsettling art, and taxidermied animals, their glass eyes glinting in the dim light. The house was exclusively decorated with antiques and creepy sort of sexual art and taxidermic critters. The parents, enigmatic and aloof, exuded an aura straight out of a cult film. The parents also reminded me of a couple out of Eyes Wide Shut, and seemed I'm pretty sure were into occult practices. Ellie's stomach knotted as she entered, the door's groan echoing her unease. The children, Liam and his friend Sophie, were sweet, but carried an odd weight, as if they sensed the house's secrets. The kid, well, he was sweet when he wasn't saying creepy things. Ellie tucked them in. The upstairs hall lined with portraits that seemed to watch her every move. Liam also was a sleepwalker. One night, a piercing scream shattered the silence. Liam's small form bolting downstairs, eyes glazed, voice trembling about a man. It also started with a blood-curdling scream and him sprinting down the stairs to find me, seeming terrified, but still definitely asleep, and not aware of his surroundings, mumbling about a man. Ellie guided him back to bed, her voice soft but her heart racing. I was able to guide him back to bed without waking him while still calming him down in his sleepwalk state. She lied, calling it a nightmare, though she felt the truth in his fear. I felt guilty telling the kids that it was just a bad dream or a nightmare when I believed that they did see something. Sophie's terror came another night, her gasps pulling Ellie upstairs, racing upstairs to find his friend once as she was hyperventilating upright in bed, and just kept repeating, "There was a man in the room. There was a man in the room." The girl's eyes were wild, fixed on an empty corner, insisting a man had stood there. Ellie searched the room, finding nothing but a chill that clung to her skin. The house played its own games. Lights flickered. Electronics hummed to life unplugged, the usual lights and electronics turning on or off suddenly. Objects tumbled from shelves, untouched. Objects falling off of shelves inexplicably when no one is in the room. Doors slammed, locks clicking shut, doors slamming shut and locking by themselves. Ellie's sister, another babysitter, glimpsed a woman gliding through a room, followed by the TV's sudden blare. My sister swears that she saw a woman walk through the room out of the corner of her eye once before the TV turned on in the next room. The estate's isolation amplified its menace. No cell service, dead landlines, coyotes wailing beyond the swamp. The property also had no cell service, and the house landlines were usually dead. Another babysitter, Ellie's friend, refused to stay inside after the kids slept, braving the cold porch instead. My friend, who used to also babysit for them, refused to even be in the house after the kids went to sleep because she hated it so much. She'd read outside, flashlight in hand, until the parents returned. She told Liam that she'd be on the front porch if he needed anything, then would sit outside and read a book until the parents returned, even if it was freezing. Ellie understood. Being alone in that house, awake, was unbearable. She preferred it to being in the house as the only awake person at night. The parents' late returns, often drunken, brought generous pay, sometimes doubled in their haze. They paid well, especially when they'd come home drunk. They'd just hand us a wad of cash, or sometimes would forget that they paid, and pay again. The house's history unraveled years later, chilling Ellie to her core. The infamous Aleister Crowley himself used to hang out on the estate back in the day, apparently. The occultist had performed rituals on the property, his legacy documented in local lore. There's even a documented story about him performing rituals on the edge of the estate. The parents' ties to a nearby New Age center only deepened the mystery. There's a famous hippie New Age center in my town that they were involved in. Ellie hadn't known this while babysitting, but it explained the house's oppressive air, the sense of something lingering. I learned about this history years after we stopped babysitting for them, obviously. The estate wasn't just haunted, it was a nexus of dark energy, its walls steeped in rituals and secrets. The children's words haunted Ellie most. Liam also had an early phase of frequently referencing the dead people. Liam's casual mentions of dead people sent shivers down her spine, his young voice too certain, too calm. Sophie's fear of the man, Liam's sleepwalking terrors. They weren't just dreams, Ellie searched the house during quiet moments, checking closets, peering into shadowed corners, but found only dust and silence. The antique seemed to hum with life, the taxidermied animals watching her every move. She avoided the basement, its door always locked, the parents' cryptic smiles a warning not to ask why. The swamp outside, the overgrown tennis courts, felt like barriers, trapping her in the estate's grip. Ellie's sister quit after her encounter with the spectral woman, her fear outweighing the pay. Ellie stayed longer, drawn by the money and Liam's fleeting sweetness. But each night tested her resolve. She kept a flashlight and a pocket knife, useless against the house's unseen forces. The parents' occult leanings became clearer. Books on mysticism tucked in shelves, strange symbols etched into furniture. Ellie overheard them mention the New Age Center, their voices low, as if guarding a secret she never asked, their detached charm intimidating her into silence. The house's history with Crowley gnawed at her after she learned it. The ritual's a possible key to its disturbances. Ellie's friend, the porch sitter, shared her own stories, whispers in empty rooms, a child's toy moving on its own. The babysitters formed a quiet pact, sharing warnings, but never confronting the parents. The estate's isolation made escape feel impossible. The dirt road a gauntlet under the coyotes' howls. Ellie memorized the parents' schedules, counting the hours until their return. Liam's sleepwalking grew less frequent, but his mentions of dead people persisted, each one a jolt to Ellie's nerves. She wondered if the house spoke to him, its secrets seeping into his dreams. Years after Ellie stopped babysitting, the estate remained a vivid scar. She drove past the dirt road once, the swamp's mist curling like fingers, and felt the same dread. The house was sold, its new owners unknown, but Ellie imagined them hearing the same slams, seeing the same shadows. She researched Crowley's time there, finding tales of seances and strange lights, echoes of the estate's current state. The New Age Center still thrived, its events drawing curious seekers. But Ellie stayed away, afraid of what she might uncover. Liam, now grown, had no memory of his sleepwalking or eerie words. But Sophie, contacted years later, recalled the man in her room, her voice trembling over the phone. Ellie kept a journal, documenting every incident, a way to process the fear. The estate's payment had funded her early adulthood, but no amount justified the nights spent in its grip. Overall, it was a really scary home to babysit in, but in the end, I would say that it was worth it. She never babysat again. The memory of the whispering estate, a warning to trust her instincts, to fear the houses that hum with secrets too old to name. The Lure by the Pool. In the shimmering heat of a tropical paradise, innocence can be a beacon for predators. The Cancun resort was a kaleidoscope of sun and laughter, its sprawling pools a playground for young Lila and her family. At 14, she was a spark of curiosity, eager to taste the freedom of a world beyond her parents' watchful eyes. The resort's vibrancy was a siren call, its guests a mosaic of strangers, but some smiles hide intentions darker than the deepest waters. Lila floated in the pool, its bar a hub of chatter, where she struck up a conversation with a group of British travelers. Their accents charming, their laughter easy. They were older, a mix of men and perhaps a woman. Their ages blurred in Lila's young mind. She felt grown up, their attention a thrill, the pool's azure a shield from her strict parents. They slipped her a wristband, a pass to the bar's forbidden drinks, claiming they were leaving and wanted to share the fun. Lila's heart raced, the alcohol a secret she kept from her father, who lounged nearby, oblivious to her sips. The group's warmth was intoxicating, their drinks flowing, her laughter louder with each glass. They teased her about a young man in their midst, insisting he was 15, urging her to talk to him. Their words persistent despite her giggles. The pool's hum masked their intent, Lila's world spinning with drink and flattery. Her father's gaze was distant, the pool too vast for his ears to catch the danger. Lila, drunk for the first time, felt invincible. Unaware of the lure tightening around her, Lila's senses dulled, the pool's sparkle fading as the group's laughter grew sharper. The man they claimed was 15 was older, his eyes too knowing, his smile a mask she couldn't read. They pressed her to join him, their insistence a drumbeat, her protests drowned by the alcohol's haze. She laughed, thinking it a game, but their eyes held a glint of purpose, their voices a coaxing tide. Her father, chatting across the pool, saw only a carefree daughter, the drink's truth hidden by Houston's. Lila, swayed by their charm, followed the man, her memory a fog. The resort's vast halls a blur as they walked, the world tilted. The Cancun sun a distant memory as they reached a bus stop, a 10-minute trek from the resort's safety. Lila's mind flickered, unease piercing her drunken haze, the man's words turning bold. He praised her body, asked intrusive questions, pulling her onto his lap, his grip a chain she couldn't break. Her laughter faltered, her heart whispering to flee, but her body betrayed her, heavy with drink. Then, a miracle, her stomach rebelled, unleashing a torrent of vomit across his face and chest. The man recoiled, disgust breaking his hold, and Lila, wobbling, followed him back, his figure fading into the resort's crowd. She staggered to the pool, vomit-stained, where her parents' panic awaited, police summoned, their voices sharp with fear. Lila's world spun, her mother's fury a sobering lash, her father's rage a quiet storm. The group had vanished, their absence a confirmation of intent. Lila's tale spilling out in halting sobs. Lila's return was a fracture, the pool's joy replaced by dread. Her mother's piercing voice cut through her haze, her father's calm shattered by a fury she'd never seen. They demanded answers, their anger not at her drinking, but at the man who'd led her away, their fear a weight she couldn't grasp. The police searched, but the group was gone, their trail cold. The resort's vastness a shield for their escape. Lila, in the hotel room, wretched in the bathtub, her body purging the night's poison, her mind reeling with shame. Her parents stood guard, their silence heavy, their eyes tracing her as if she might vanish again. Her father's curses, in their native tongue, echoed from the kitchen, a rage born of love, not blame. Lila, drifting in and out, felt their disappointment, her heart sinking under its weight. She'd thought it a lark, but their fear revealed the truth. She'd danced with danger, her innocence a lure. The resort was no longer a paradise, its pools a trap she'd narrowly escaped. Her parents' love was her anchor, their anger a fire against the man who'd preyed on her. They stayed close, their quiet a shield, their gaze a vow to never let her slip away. Lila's shame faded, replaced by gratitude for the instinct that saved her. The Cancun sun still shone, but its warmth was hers to reclaim. The lure by the pool was a memory, and Lila was its survivor. Lila's escape was a turning point, the resort a lesson in the world's shadows. She learned of others, guests who'd felt the same lure, their stories whispered in the resort's halls. The group was no chance encounter, but part of a network, predators cloaked in charm, targeting the young and unwary. Security tightened. The resort's glow dimmed by the truth of its dangers. Lila's parents, once strict, became her guardians, their love a fortress, their vigilance a vow. She grew cautious, her innocence tempered, her intuition a compass she'd never ignore. The Cancun nights were hers again, but Lila walked with eyes open, the pool a memory of peril. She shared her story, not for pity, but for power, warning others of the shadows beneath the sun. The man's face haunted her, but his defeat was her triumph. Her body's revolt, a shield. Her family healed, their bond stronger. The resort, a chapter closed. Lila's heart was fierce, her courage a flame that burned brighter for the dark she'd faced. The lure by the pool was a lesson, and Lila was its teacher. The stars above Cancun glittered, the resort's hum a distant song. Lila stood tall, her parents near, their love a light against the night. The predator's pull was broken, and she was whole. Lila's life was reshaped. The Cancun incident, a pivot from naivety to strength. She traveled again, but with wisdom, her eyes sharp, her instincts honed. The resort was a ghost, its pools a memory, but Lila was their conqueror, her story a beacon for the vulnerable. She connected with survivors, their tales a mirror, their courage a chorus against the dark. The network of predators was real, but so was the network of those who fought back. Lila's voice grew, her tale a warning, her survival a testament to the power of instinct. Her family was her rock, their love a canvas painted with trust. The Cancun sun was hers to claim, its shadows no match for her light. The lure by the pool was a chapter closed, its lesson etched in her soul. Lila lived boldly, her heart unbowed, the world vast but navigable. The resort was a memory, but Lila was its master, her dawn eternal. The predator's shadow was gone, and she was free. Under the stars, Lila stood, her spirit bright, her family's love a shield. The night was hers, its dangers known, its wonders hers to embrace. The lure was silent, and Lila was its eternal dawn. The winged shadow of a choke canyon. The Texas night was thick with heat, the air humming with cicadas, as Robert and Chester set up their fishing gear along the banks of Choke Canyon. The lake's dark waters lapped gently, reflecting a sliver of moon, but an uneasy stillness clung to the brush country. One of my father's uncles claims that he saw a large winged humanoid bird with glowing eyes swooped down on he and one of his buddies while out at the lake known as Choke Canyon, fishing for catfish late into the night. Robert, bone-tired from a day in construction, slumped into his truck's driver's seat, craving sleep. Robert, having worked in construction and having worked that entire day, was feeling pretty sleepy and decided to nap in the truck. Chester, beer in hand, stayed by the rods, the radio's soft twang his only company. Chester stayed on the lake bank, listening to the radio and watching their fishing rods that were casted out into the water. Neither knew the night would birth a terror they'd never forget. The stars were sharp, the brush country's vastness swallowing sound. But Chester's calm shattered with a rustle, a low, rhythmic flapping, like sails catching wind. He heard what sounded like a large bird flapping its wings behind him. He turned, his eyes straining against the dark, and froze. A shape loomed, massive, its wings spanning 12 feet or more. A bird-like humanoid, kind of like a large crane-like bird, with a human face and beak-like mouth with glowing red eyes and a massive wingspan. Something like Tutuetfektu wingspan. Its eyes burned red, piercing, set in a face too human, too wrong. He turned around and sees this thing flapping just behind and above him, and appeared to be readying to land right where Chester was sitting. Chester's chair tipped as he bolted, his breath ragged, toward the truck. Chester's fists pounded the truck's window, his voice a raw plea. He's rudely awakened by Chester, who was screaming and pounding his fist on the passenger side of the truck, yelling like a madman for Robert to unlock the door. Robert, startled awake, fumbled the lock, his friend's panic infectious. Robert unlocks the door and asks Chester, who is out of breath and panicking, what the heck is going on. Chester, wild-eyed, gasped about the creature, its wings, its eyes. Chester, clearly panicked and freaking out, says to start the truck up and for them to get the heck out of there. Robert's skepticism crumbled as he glanced in the rearview mirror, the brake lights casting a red glow on a figure, tall, crane-like, stalking closer. Robert also sees the large bird-like creature laying behind the truck and begin walking around the truck over to the passenger side. Its legs were spindly, its form both bird and man, unnatural in every way. Robert's hands shook as he turned the key, the engine roaring to life. Robert starts up the truck, and he throws the truck into gear and just peels out of there. The creature's silhouette shrank in the mirror, but its eyes lingered in his mind, glowing like embers. It was shaped like a man-sized crane, with thin, long legs that looked like it would stand at eye level with an average-height man, and it was the creepiest thing that he had ever seen. They sped through the night, the lake's eerie calm left behind. They end up getting back to place, and Chester and he both decide to spend the night together, shotguns at hand, until morning. At Robert's house, they sat, shotguns ready. The night stretching endlessly, each sound a potential return of the winged shadow. The next day, armed to the teeth, they returned to the lake, hearts pounding. They ended up going back the following day, armed to the teeth, to retrieve their fishing poles, folding chairs, and other fishing gear. The sand bore strange prints, long, clawed, unlike any bird or beast they knew. Found the footprints of the whatever it was that they saw still fresh and in the sand around their fishing spot. Robert and Chester, hardened South Texans, had hunted and fished these lands their whole lives, but this was no animal they recognized. These two were born and bred South Texan country boys like my father, and had grown up in the brush country, hunting birds, bobcats, alligators at that same lake fishing, and being common rural kids. So they had a lifetime of experiences with wildlife in that region and had never seen anything like it. They resumed their fishing trips, but never without firearms, the lake's beauty forever tainted by the creature's gaze. They would end up eventually going back to fish in the evenings, but they would always be sure to take firearms for protection from that point on. The brush country held its secrets close, and Robert swore he'd never nap by Choke Canyon again. The winged shadow a specter in his dreams. The horned wanderer, the wooden bridge groaned under the truck's weight, its planks worn by years of Texas dust and rain. Clara and Henry, weary from a long day visiting family, navigated the narrow dirt road toward their Christine ranch, the night sky a vast, moonlit canvas. They were on their way home from visiting some family in the south side of San Antonio, about 70 miles away. The creek below, dry save for storm seasons, yawned beneath the 80-foot span, Spanish moss draping the trees like spectral veils. Spanish moss now hangs from the trees, which really makes it creepy. and from what I remember, this bridge is about 80 feet long from end to end. Then, without warning, the truck died, its lights and engine fading into silence. As my great-grandparents are driving over this wooden bridge, their truck suddenly dies and comes to a stop near the middle of the bridge. Henry cursed, his frustration sharp in the quiet night. My great-grandfather starts swearing up a storm because he's tired it's late, and they're still about 10 miles from home. Henry, a brush country native, was unfazed by the dark, his life spent taming its wilds. My great-grandfather was born in the brush country of South Texas, so there's not much that he hasn't seen out there. He stepped out, popping the hood, suspecting a loose battery cable, thinking that it has to be a battery connection that has come loose. My great-grandfather asks great-grandmother to hang tight, pops the hood, and opens his door. Stepping out into the cool night to check under the hood, Clara waited, the moonlight her only guide, the creek's depths a shadowed abyss below. They were stuck there with only the moon bathing them and their surroundings in the soft moonlight. Then, a sound, clip-clopping, like hooves on wood, steady and deliberate. Behind him, he hears the sound of clip-clops on the wooden bridge. It sounded like steps of a hoofed animal approaching him from behind. Henry turned, his eyes narrowing, expecting a stray animal. He turns around and lets his eyes adjust to the dim moonlight to see what's making that noise. What emerged from the dark was no deer or goat, a thin figure, barely 5.5 feet, with massive ram horns curling from its head. Squinting, he looks down the bridge and sees what appears to be a very thin man, about 5 feet tall, but with a set of very large ram horns on his head, walking upright. Its hoofed feet struck the bridge, the sound chilling Henry's blood. Its hoofed feet clip-clopping on the wooden bridge that was what was making the sound. He slammed the hood shut, diving back into the truck, locking the door. A cold chill ran up my great-grandfather's spine, and he quickly shut the truck hood and hops back into the driver's seat, slamming shut the door behind him and locking it. Clara, startled, demanded answers. My great-grandmother, confused by his sudden reactions, asks what's going on. Henry pointed, his voice low. My great-grandfather points at the humanoid that is now slowly approaching their vehicle. The creature drew closer, its horns glinting, its body gaunt and human-like, yet wrong. They can now see that the horns on its head are very large, much larger than any ram or goat that they've ever seen. It dropped to all fours, circling the truck, its hooves a relentless rhythm. It was about 20 feet from the front of their truck when it hunches over and begins walking on all fours of its cloven feet. Clara's breath hitched, her Catholic faith urging her to pray. My great-grandmother, being very Catholic, begins praying quietly under her breath. The thing paced, never touching the truck, its horns bobbing in the moonlight. They both agreed that it had the body of a bony, skinny man. But with the head of a goat, they both said that the creepiest part of the encounter was watching its large horns bobble around the front and rear of their truck. Its presence was malevolent, a darkness that pressed against their souls. After circling, it stood upright, sauntering back into the night. On its 5th or 6th time walking around their truck, it stands back up on its hind legs and meanders towards the opposite end of the bridge from which it came, eventually disappearing into the black night. The truck roared to life moments later, as if released. Weirdly too, a moment later, like clockwork, power is restored to their vehicle. Henry sped home, Clara clutching his arm. My great-grandfather starts the truck up and peels out of there quickly, making a beeline for their home. They locked their ranch tight, firearms ready, sleep impossible. They rush into the house and grab firearms, and they spend the rest of the night locking all their doors and windows, and they didn't get any sleep. From that night, Henry never drove without a shotgun. The horned wanderer, a specter that haunted their quiet life. From that night onward, my great-grandfather always kept a loaded shotgun and a pistol in his truck with him. He never left without one. The creek watcher, the hill country sun beat down on the construction site. A half-built garage rising from the earth between Blanco and Spring Branch. Jose, part of a tight-knit crew of Mexican laborers, wiped sweat from his brow. The creek behind the house, a tempting shade of cool. A house that they were building a 2-story garage at in the hill country, a little bit north of Spring Branch, Texas. The men were no strangers to hard work, their days long under the Texas heat. They were no nonsense group of Mexican laborers, hard-working guys who would be at the job site until sundown, busting their butts in the hot sun to earn a decent paycheck. Lunch was a brief respite, most napping in trucks or under trees. After the crew had eaten and were resting in their trucks and in the shade of some of the trees, Jose, restless, wandered to the creek, seeking a moment alone. One of the guys went down to the creek behind the house to take a pee and explore the property a bit. The creek's shallow waters glinted, bordered by a wooded slope, its trees thick with shadow. Behind the house was a sort of sloped wooded area that led down to a nice little shallow creek. Jose paused, his eyes catching movement. A large, brown shape behind a tree, like a bear watching him. He said that he saw what he thought was a big brown bear peeking around a tree at him. His heart quickened. Bears rare in these parts. And he backed away. Slow and deliberate. Naturally, he got a bit spooked and startled, slowly backpedaling to the house up the hill, trying his best not to make any sudden movements and to not take his eyes off of this bear. The creature moved, darting across the creek, and Jose's breath caught. It ran upright, like a man, its fur dark and matted. The bear ran from behind the tree and darted across the creek and into the woods on the other side. That was when the worker got a clear look at it and saw that it wasn't a bear. Jose's legs burned as he sprinted up the hill, his voice raw with panic. When he saw it run and realized that it wasn't a bear, that's when he broke into a frenzied run, to the rest of the guys screaming at them to get into the trucks and for them to leave. The crew, startled by his fear, hesitated, but his wide eyes told them enough. They were a little thrown off by him, but he jumped into his truck and peeled off. Jose's truck roared to life, tires spitting gravel, and the others followed. Their own fear ignited. The rest of them, they saw how scared he was, and so they quickly followed him and their own 2 trucks. They fled to a gas station, crowding a payphone to call their boss, Ellie's father, a contractor. My father told us the work crew called him from a payphone at a gas station. At the station, Jose's hands shook as he recounted the creature. Tall, humanoid, covered in fur. No bear, but something else. It ran upright on 2 legs and had the build of a large man covered in dark fur. The crew, tough men of the hill country, were rattled, their usual stoicism gone. They told him that they weren't going back to the job site until the following day because they were just too frightened. They asked to bring rifles, a request born of terror, not bravado. Also, if it would be okay for them to bring some rifles and shotguns to keep in their trucks on that project until they were done. Ellie's father, skeptical but trusting their judgment, agreed. The site's eerie quiet now, a warning he couldn't ignore. The crew returned the next day, armed and wary. The creek's banks unchanged but heavy with menace. They found no tracks, no signs, but the memory of Jose's sprint, his voice breaking, kept them on edge. The garage was finished, but the men worked faster, their eyes on the trees. Ellie, hearing the story as a child, pictured a hulking figure, its gaze fixed on Jose, a watcher in the wilds. The hill country held its secrets, and the crew never spoke of it again. Their rifles a silent vow to face whatever lurked in the creek's shadows. The whispering woods, in the quiet sprawl of a Kentucky town. A child's playground can hide a darkness that whispers. The greater Cincinnati area, straddling the Kentucky border, was a patchwork of history. Its fields once hunting grounds for Cherokee and Shawnee. For Jonas, a father raising his son. Ethan, in this diverse land. The nearby trailer park was a beacon of community. Its neat rows of homes a haven for play. The park's basketball courts and open fields buzzed with life. Its streets safe for children's games. But some places hold secrets that only the young can hear. Jonas drove Ethan to the trailer park, a place unlike the stereotypes, its tidy lawns and playgrounds a magnet for his son's new friends. Ethan thrived, his laughter echoing with kids like Kevin, whose trailer flanked a small wooded strip. The woods, a narrow acre between homes, stretched thin along the interstate, a buffer against its roar. The park was a paradise, with courts, fields, and a wooded patch where kids explored. But Jonas sensed a shadow beneath its charm. He became a fixture, the cool dad who took Ethan's friends on trips. His car, a confessional for their tales. The kids' stories were wild, born of imagination, or so he thought, until their fear became too real. They spoke of dark figures in the woods, featureless forms that vanished, their voices trembling with a truth Jonas couldn't dismiss. The trailer park was a puzzle, its joy laced with unease. Jonas watched Ethan, his heart torn between trust and doubt. The woods a riddle he'd yet to face. The whispering woods were calling, and Jonas was their reluctant listener. Jonas's visits to the trailer park grew frequent, his role as driver blending into confidant. The kids' chatter filled his car, their stories of the woods shifting from playful to chilling. They described tall, featureless figures watching from the trees, sounds of growls, wails, and voices mimicking friends or crying babies, luring them deeper. The tales were vivid, the fear in their eyes unmistakable, especially Kevin's, whose home sat by the wood's edge. Jonas, skeptical, saw their flushed faces, their scratches, red marks on the weakest or most distressed. The kids called it a skinwalker, a name borrowed from trends, but Jonas sensed something older, its pull strongest on the vulnerable. He listened, piecing together patterns. The woods targeted the fragile, its whispers a trap for the unwary. The park's vibrancy dimmed, its fields tainted by stories of unseen eyes. Jonas learned of Kevin's terror, a dark figure in his room, its formless gaze a mirror of the wood's specters. The kids, once a tight group, fractured, their feud splitting friends into foes, yet their stories held firm. Jonas's doubt wavered, the consistency across divided voices a clue to a deeper truth. He saw the park's decay, cars failing, relationships crumbling, children turning aggressive, accidents rising, a teenager's knife flashing over a petty dispute. The trailer park was a paradox, its beauty a mask for a creeping malaise. Jonas's heart sank, Ethan's joy at risk, the woods a threat he couldn't ignore. The whispering woods were alive, and Jonas was their observer. Jonas's curiosity became obsession, the kids' fear a call to action. He spoke to parents, their tales of broken cars and shattered bonds echoing the kids' dread. The park's darkness was palpable, a force that soured lives, yet only the young saw its source in the woods. Jonas researched, delving into the land's past, finding whispers of native rituals, offerings to spirits gone wrong, binding something to the earth. The woods were a remnant, a sacred grove turned sour, its energy a curse on the park. He felt it now, a weight in the air. The woods' whispers a chorus of ancient grief. Kevin's stories grew darker, his sleep haunted by the figure, his scratches a mark of its reach. Jonas banned Ethan from the woods, but the boy's eyes held questions, his friend's fear a shared bond. Jonas stood by the arch, the woods silent but watching, their pull a lure he resisted. He sought elders, their tales of lost hunters and cursed grounds aligning with the kid's visions. The entity was no skinwalker, but a remnant, its formless rage fed by pain. Jonas planned, his heart set on protecting Ethan. The park's decay a warning he'd heed. The trailer park was a battleground, its joy at stake. Jonas's love for Ethan was his guide, the woods a foe he'd face. The whispering woods were a curse, and Jonas was their challenger. Jonas gathered allies, parents, elders, and Kevin, whose courage matched his fear. They planned a cleansing, drawing on native wisdom, their hands steady with salt and sage. The kids' stories guided them. The woods' lure strongest on the weak, its scratches a claim on the broken. They entered at dusk, the air thick, the oaks whispering secrets older than the park. Jonas led, his voice firm, offering peace to the spirits, his heart a shield for Ethan. They burned sage, scattered salt, their prayers a chant against the dark. The woods' growls fading to silence. The figures appeared, tall and formless, their gazes heavy but faltering. Jonas stood with Kevin, their resolve alight, the entity's power waning. The air cleared, the scratches on Kevin's arm fading, the woods' curse lifting like a fog. The park breathed, its decay slowing, relationships mending, aggression easing. Jonas and Ethan grew closer, their bond forged in the fight. The trailer park theirs again. The whispering woods were still, their shadows gone. The ritual of victory, the community healed, the kids' laughter returning, the fields alive once more. Jonas watched, his heart full, the woods a memory of triumph. The curse was broken, and Jonas was its banisher. Jonas's life was reshaped, the trailer park a testament to resilience. The woods stood quiet, their oaks guardians of a cleansed land, their whispers now a breeze. The kids played, their fear a story told in hushed tones. Kevin's courage a badge he wore with pride. Ethan thrived, his friends' bonds stronger, the park a haven reclaimed. Jonas shared the tale, not for proof, but for wisdom, a warning to respect the unseen. The trailer park was whole, its darkness lifted, the woods a chapter closed. He walked the fields, Ethan by his side, their love a light against the past. The greater Cincinnati land was vast, its history a tapestry of spirits and survival. The whispering woods were silent, and Jonas was their keeper. Lila lived boldly, her heart unbowed, the world vast but navigable. The woods were a memory, but Jonas was their master, his dawn eternal. The lure of the dark was gone, and he was free. Under the stars, Jonas stood, the park alive, his family's love a shield. The night was theirs, its shadows kind, its secrets honored. The woods were still, and Jonas was their eternal dawn. The vanishing crowd. The Ohio night pulsed with the fading roar of an Aerosmith concert, the air thick with sweat and adrenaline as thousands spilled into the parking lot. Linda and Tom, with their teenage son, Mark, wove through the crowd, the streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. After the concert, The three of them were walking to the parking lot in a huge crowd of people. The energy was electric, voices loud, but a strange stillness settled over Linda as they neared the curb. My parents were standing on one side of the street about to step off the curb. Across the street, two hooded figures stood, their cloaks swallowing the light. When they saw two hooded figures across the street, Linda's breath caught, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, terribly wrong. The figures were motionless, their faces hidden, but their presence felt like a weight, pressing against her chest. By the time their foot hit the pavement, the figures were directly in front of them. In a blink, they were there, inches away, their cloaks rippling as if untouched by gravity. They also seemed to float without feet and moved from one side of the street to the other in an instant. No feet touched the ground. No steps echoed. They simply were. Linda's heart pounded, Tom's hand tightening on hers. But before they could react, the world dissolved. The crowd, the noise, the night itself vanished, leaving only a void, a gap in time they couldn't grasp. The next moment, Linda and Tom stood alone. Not where they'd been, their arms outstretched, palms up, a tingling sensation coursing through their hands and forearms. The next thing that they knew, they are standing alone, not in the exact same place that they were, with their arms outstretched from the elbow, palms facing up, and their hands and forearms are tingling. The parking lot was a ghost town, empty save for their car, the crowd gone as if swallowed by the night. They made their way back to the car, and when they did, nobody else was around anymore. The parking lot was empty except for their car. Mark sat on the bumper, his face pale, his eyes wide with worry. My brother was sitting on the bumper waiting for them, and said that he had been waiting for them for about 2 hours. He'd waited 2 hours, alone, after losing them in the crowd. Mark's voice trembled as he explained. He'd turned, and they were gone, vanished in the sea of people. My brother says that he was walking, and he turned around, and they were just gone. He'd retraced his steps, searched, then waited, the minutes crawling by. He went back to the car and waited. Linda and Tom stared at each other, their minds blank. No memory of the lost hours. My parents have no recollection of what happened during that 2-hour period. The tingling in their arms faded, but a deeper unease took root, a sense that something had reached into their lives and pulled them away. They drove home in silence, the concert's thrill erased by a mystery that clung like damp fog. Weeks later, a revelation deepened the enigma. Linda was pregnant. 2 weeks after this incident, my mom finds out that she is pregnant with me. They wondered if the figures, the lost time, were tied to the child she carried, a connection too strange to dismiss. They believe that this may be the reason that they were approached. The family kept the story close, sharing it only with their son, the narrator, who grew up hearing their fear, their certainty. My parents have told this story to me numerous times throughout my life, and both of them and my older brother corroborate this story. In exact detail, they seem genuinely terrified of what happened. They believed it was extraterrestrial, a brush with beings beyond their world. They believe this encounter was some kind of extraterrestrial being. The story haunted the family, a wound that never fully healed. Linda and Tom, grounded people with no history of delusion, clung to their account, their terror palpable. They've told very few people about this experience. Their son, the narrator, wrestled with it, torn between belief and doubt. I personally have never experienced anything unexplainable like this. but I do believe their story. He'd never known them to lie. Their sanity unquestioned. I've never known them to make things up, and they're not psychotic or anything. Yet the idea of aliens felt too vast, too unprovable. I believe their experience was genuine, but I'm not certain that aliens are the explanation. But I'm also not ruling it out. The concert crowd, hundreds strong, made it stranger. How had no one else noticed? This happened in a post-concert crowd with hundreds of people around. Mind you, he considered drugs, a plausible culprit in the chaotic post-concert haze. For those of you who may be thinking that they were dosed, I agree that this is a strong possibility. But no substance he knew could erase 2 hours, leaving only tingling limbs and an empty lot. I'm not aware of any drug that can cause this. His own existence added another layer, born from that pregnancy. He wondered if he was the key. I don't think my mom got pregnant during this incident. She was already pregnant, and just didn't know it yet, I guess. Tests offered no answers. His DNA was human. His MRIs normal. For those who may be thinking about a DNA test, I did Ancestry, and there wasn't anything crazy in the results. I've also had MRIs before, and I have normal human anatomy. The family searched for others who'd seen the figures, posting queries in obscure forums, but found no matches. The concert, a blur of noise and light, seemed an unlikely stage for such an event. Yet its chaos might have masked the figure's approach. Linda avoided crowded events after. Her trust in normalcy fractured. Tom kept a flashlight in the car, a reflex against the dark. Mark, forever marked by those 2 hours alone, grew quiet. His teenage bravado dimmed. They never returned to Ohio. The memory of that night, a weight they carried in silence, a question with no answer. The narrator, now an adult, sifted through the story's fragments, seeking logic in the impossible. He read about abductions, time lapses, and concert-induced hallucinations, but none fit perfectly. The hooded figures, their fluid movement, defied every explanation. Human, chemical, or cosmic. He visited the venue once, now older, its parking lot mundane under daylight, but felt a prickle, as if the air remembered his parents' fear. Mark's haunted eyes were proof enough that something had happened. Even if its nature remained elusive, he kept their story alive, hoping for insight, a shared experience to anchor it. The tingling in their arms, the empty lot, the lost hours, they were pieces of a puzzle too vast for one family. Anyway, it's a weird story, I know, but like I said, if you have any light to shed on it, then please do let me know. The narrator wondered if others had stood in that crowd, seen those figures, and stayed silent, their own stories buried. The concert's echo faded, but the mystery endured, a shadow cast by 2 hooded forms, floating without feet, stealing time from a night that should have been ordinary. The anklets grasp in the stillness of a familiar home. The dark can hold a presence that claws at the soul. The old house of Lila's grandfather was a refuge, its creaking floors a haven for her and her toddler. During a turbulent time, a light sleeper, haunted by insomnia and the terror of shadows. Lila dreaded the night, her sprints from light switches a ritual of fear. The house was warm, its rooms a comfort, but the dark held secrets. Some spirits linger, their touch colder than the grave. Lila lived there nearly a year, the days untroubled, until one night, as she slept, a sensation stirred her. Something grasped her ankle, a firm, deliberate pull. She jolted, her heart racing, assuming her child or the cat had climbed onto the bed. Her aversion to touch flared, and she kicked, expecting a soft retreat, but her foot met something solid, unyielding. The impact echoed. A thud on the floor, followed by a scream, unearthly, not feline, a wail of rage that pierced the night. Lila sat up, her breath shallow, and saw a figure, a woman, human-like, crawling frantically across the floor, her movements erratic, her eyes blazing with agitation. The room was a cage, the air thick with malice, the window a fleeting hope. She recoiled against the headboard, glancing away, and when she looked back, the figure was gone. The silence a mocking veil. Lila clung to the bed, her fear a chain, the dark a predator she couldn't face. Her grandfather's voice echoed later, revealing the room's past. His mother-in-law, lost to dementia, her spirit bound to the house, her unrest tied to Lila's strained ties with her daughter. The anklet's grasp was a warning, and Lila was its target. Lila's nights were haunted, the anklet's grasp a scar on her soul. The house, once a sanctuary, was a labyrinth of shadows, its warmth tainted by the woman's gaze. She spoke to her grandfather, his words a key. The spirit, restless, might resent her, her discord with the family a spark for its wrath. Lila's fear of the dark deepened, her insomnia a torment, the room a battlefield she dreaded. She researched, finding tales of spirits trapped by unresolved pain, their touch a plea for release. The woman's crawl, her scream, was no demon, but a soul caught in anguish. Her grasp a call Lila couldn't ignore. Lila acted, her intuition guiding her to sage and salt, her prayers a soft chant to soothe the spirit. She stood in the room, her toddler asleep, the cat watching, and spoke to the woman, offering peace, her voice a bridge to the past. The air softened, the grasp a memory, the house's shadows lifting, the spirit's rage fading. Lila's bond with her grandfather grew, their talks healing old rifts, the family's love a balm. The house was hers again, its dark a canvas for courage, its spirits at rest. The anklet's grasp was gone, and Lila was its liberator. Under the stars, Lila stood, the house quiet, her heart steady. The night was hers, its shadows kind, its secrets shared. The spirit was free, and Lila was whole. The masked intruder. The bedroom was a sanctuary of soft light, the hum of the afternoon fading as Claire sank into her bed, exhausted from work. Naps were rare, a luxury she seldom indulged, but today her body demanded rest. I really don't nap often, maybe like twice a month if anything. Her mind, though, refused to quiet, hovering in a liminal state, half asleep, half aware. The room's contours vivid behind her closed eyes. I've noticed that when I do nap, I can never fully let my mind shut off, so when I fall asleep, I'm never in an actual deep sleep. She lay on her side, blanket pulled to her chin, her dog, Max, snoring beside her. I feel like I'm somewhere between asleep and awake, I guess, still aware of my surroundings with my eyes closed, if that makes sense. Then, a shift. The mattress dipped, a weight creeping from the edge. Slow and deliberate, Claire's breath caught, her body frozen as the presence moved closer, its approach silent but heavy. I felt something crawl up on the edge of my bed, and it made its way over to my body. It felt human, masculine, its form pressing against her side. I was laying on my side and had a blanket up to my chin, so I couldn't see what it was, but it felt like a man. Her first thought was her husband, Ethan, back from the gym, playing a prank. At first I thought it was my husband as he had gone to the gym, and I thought maybe he came back and was messing with me. But a sound shattered that hope, a deep, rasping breath. Too loud, too close. As its head got closer to mine, it kept making a loud breathing sound. Her heart pounded, the air thick with menace, the blanket a barrier she dared not move. In her mind's eye, the room took shape, its details sharp despite her closed lids. In my sleep, I remember I could see my room. She forced a sliver of vision, her eyes barely parting, and glimpsed a figure, a man, his face obscured by a white mask, stark and featureless, like a horror movie specter. I was able to barely take a peek at it, and it looked like a man wearing a white mask. It loomed over her, its weight pinning her to the bed. It kind of reminded me of the Jason mask, but I couldn't really tell, because my vision was like when you barely open your eyes, and you can only see a little, and it's kind of blurry. The mask's edges blurred, but its presence was undeniable, a shadow born from nightmare. I could feel his weight on top of me. The figure's breath grazed her neck, hot and rhythmic, a violation of her stillness. I kept feeling the breathing on me. Then, a sensation, wet, invasive, as it seemed to suck at her ear, the feeling vivid and wrong. The thing or the man started trying to suck on my ear, and I could feel the sensation. Claire's mind screamed, recognizing the trap of sleep paralysis, her body a prisoner. At this point, I think I realized I was in sleep paralysis and couldn't wake up. She fought, willing her limbs to move, her heart a frantic drum. I kept pushing my body to try and wake myself up. With a final surge, she broke free, her eyes snapping open to an empty room, the weight gone. Finally, I was able to, and when I woke up for real, I looked, and there was nobody there. The silence was deafening. Max still asleep beside her, undisturbed. My husband was still at the gym. Claire's pulse raced, her hand brushing her ear. Wet. Impossibly wet. The strangest thing was that when I went to touch my ear, it was actually wet, and I have no idea how that could have actually happened. She froze, the dampness a chilling proof of something she couldn't explain. I know it's super creepy, but for some reason I wasn't really scared at first. Max's calm puzzled her. He'd bark at any threat, yet he slept through it all. My dog was napping next to me, completely passed out, and I feel like if it was something bad, that he would have sensed it and woken up. The room felt smaller, its familiarity tainted by the masked intruder's echo. Claire sat up, her breath uneven, the afternoon light no longer comforting. The wet ear gnawed at her, a detail too real for a dream. She checked the house, doors locked, windows secure, Ethan's gym bag still gone. The blanket, untouched, offered no clues, its folds as she'd left them. She wiped her ear, the dampness lingering on her fingers, a mystery that defied logic. Sleep paralysis was familiar. Her naps often trapped her in that half-world. But this was different. The mask, the breath, the touch too vivid, too physical. She called Ethan, his voice grounding her, confirming he was still at the gym. Claire didn't tell him, not yet, afraid to voice the impossible. She researched sleep paralysis, finding tales of shadow figures, but none mentioned a wet ear, a tangible mark. The mask haunted her, its blankness like a void, echoing horror icons, but unique in its menace. She avoided naps after, the bed no longer a refuge, its edge a place where something could crawl. Max's silence troubled her. His instincts were sharp, yet he'd sensed nothing, or perhaps he'd known it wasn't a threat he could fight. Claire's nights grew restless, her sleep shallow, the fear of slipping back into that state ever present. She kept a light on, the dark too inviting for the masked figure. Friends dismissed it as a vivid dream, but the dampness was her anchor, a proof she couldn't ignore. She wondered if the house held something, a presence stirred by her liminal naps. The gym became Ethan's sanctuary, Claire's avoidance of solitude a silent ritual. She searched forums, seeking others who'd felt such a touch, but found only echoes, never answers. The incident faded into routine, but Claire's guard never lowered. She moved the bed, hoping to disrupt whatever lingered at its edge. Max stayed closer now, his warmth a small comfort, though his silence that day still puzzled her. She told Ethan eventually, his skepticism gentle but firm, urging her to see a doctor. A sleep study revealed nothing, no disorders, no clues. The mask became a private ghost, its image surfacing in quiet moments, the breathing a sound she swore she heard in the house's stillness. Claire's story spread to a few trusted friends, their reactions mixed, some curious, others uneasy. She kept a journal, detailing the nap, the figure, the wet ear, hoping to trap the memory on paper. The house, once a home, felt like a stage, its quiet corners waiting for the intruder's return. She never napped again, the risk too great. The masked man, a specter born from her own mind, or something else. Something that left a mark she could feel. A mystery that clung to her like the dampness on her skin. The guardian's bark, in the warmth of a trusted home. The night can turn predator, its shadows cloaking danger. The neighborhood was a cocoon of safety, its tree-lined streets a tapestry of friendly faces, where everyone knew each other's names. For Lila, a young girl, and her older sister, Mara, their home was a fortress, its walls a shield against the world's worries. The living room glowed with the hum of the TV, their homework a quiet ritual. But even the safest havens can harbor threats that creep in the dark. Lila and Mara lounged, alone, their parents away, the front and back doors locked, but the side door, broken and unused, left vulnerable by their father's delay. The night was calm, the house a bubble of peace, until a sound broke the spell, a rattle from the fence outside, sharp and deliberate. Lila's heart skipped, her sister's eyes narrowing as they peered through the blinds. Two figures, clad in black, hospital masks hiding their faces, scaled the fence, their movements swift and practiced. The sisters froze, panic surging, and dove between the couches, their breaths shallow. The TV's murmur a fragile cover. The front door's knob jiggled, its lock holding firm, but the side door loomed, a gaping flaw in their sanctuary. They knew the intruders would try it next, its broken lock an open invitation, their fear a vice around their hearts. The house was no longer safe, the night a hunter, its claws at the door. Lila clung to Mara, their courage tested, the shadows outside a promise of peril. The guardian's bark was yet to sound, but the sisters were its spark. Lila's world shrank to the space between the couches. Mara's hand a lifeline as the side door's handle rattled, a slow, deliberate twist. The house held its breath, the intruder's steps a whisper of menace, their intent a shadow over the sisters' fear. The jiggling grew louder, waking the dogs, Toaster, a gentle giant, and a Rottweiler, their barks erupting into a symphony of chaos, a roar that shook the walls. The noise was a shield, the intruder's panic audible as they shouted, "They've got dogs!" Their retreat marked by the fence's clatter, a desperate leap to escape. The sisters exhaled, their terror easing, the dog's fury a beacon of salvation. The guardian's bark had prevailed. The intruders gone. The house reclaimed by its protectors. Lila and Mara emerged, trembling, to find their dogs wagging, their ferocity a facade, their love the true force. The family returned. The police called. A news report revealing the intruders. Armed robbers who struck a nearby gas station. Their masks now off, their faces etched in Lila's mind. The dogs, known for their gentleness, had wielded their breed's fearsome reputation, a gift that saved the night. The sisters' bond deepened. Their parents' relief, a tide of love. The side door soon fixed. Lila learned of a local crime ring. The intruders, its pawns. Their attempt thwarted by canine courage. The guardian's bark was a legend, and Lila was its keeper. The neighborhood stood firm, its safety restored. The dogs heroes in a quiet haven. Lila walked taller, Mara's hand a constant. Their home a fortress renewed. The intruder's shadow was gone, and the sisters were whole. The Blade's Edge. The Australian dusk painted the highway in shades of gold, the air alive with the hum of distant Sydney nightlife. Jenny and her friend Sarah, young and fearless, stood on the roadside, thumbs outstretched, their laughter cutting through the evening breeze. My mom and her friend, they were heading into Sydney to party. Hitchhiking was their ticket to the city's pulse, a common ritual in those freer days. They wandered along the road with their thumbs out until they got a ride. A car slowed. Its driver, a man with a warm smile, his voice easy and welcoming. Mom sat in the back, her friend in the front, and the guy who picked them up seemed friendly enough, chatty and polite. Jenny settled into the back seat, Sarah chatting up front, the promise of a night out brightening their spirits. He was happy to drive them into Sydney. But as the miles passed, a shadow crept into the car, silent and cold. The road stretched on, but the city's glow didn't appear. It wasn't until they noticed the car was heading the wrong way that things took a turn. The highway gave way to narrower paths, the trees closing in, their branches clawing at the sky. They were not going towards the city, but heading deeper into the forest. The driver's chatter faded, his face a mask of quiet intent. The driver had now gone silent too. Sarah glanced back, her eyes meeting Jenny's, a shared unease sparking between them. Finally, one too many turns had been taken in the wrong direction. It was palpably obvious that they were not heading into Sydney. The forest loomed, its darkness swallowing the road, and Jenny's heart began to race, her instincts screaming danger. Sarah broke the silence, her voice sharp. One of them was like, "What the heck is going on? Where are you taking us?" The driver's response was a low growl, chilling in its finality. He broke his silence then, just to say, "You just shut up and sit there. You're going where I take you." The words landed like a blow. The car's confines, suddenly a cage. Jenny's pulse thundered, her mind racing for escape. What he didn't realize was that in spite of being a small and pretty woman, my mom, well, she was my mom. She wasn't just a passenger, she was a fighter. Her resolve forged in moments like this. She was sitting behind him. Her hand slipped into her bag, fingers closing around the familiar weight of her pocket knife. Jenny's movements were swift, silent, the knife's blade glinting as she unfolded it. She took her pocket knife out of her bag, unfolded it. She leaned forward, the steel pressing firmly against the driver's throat, her voice a deadly whisper. Reached through and put the blade very firmly against his throat, and she said in his ear, "If you even try to touch my hand, I will kill you." Her words were ice, each syllable a promise. "Turn this car around right now and drive us into Sydney." The driver froze, his breath shallow. The car's hum the only sound. He didn't say a word, he just turned the car around and drove towards the city. Jenny held the blade steady, her grip unwavering. The forest retreating as the city's lights finally appeared. My mom sat up and kept that blade pressed against his throat right up until the minute that he pulled over. The car stopped, the driver's hands rigid on the wheel. Her and her friend got out of the car. Jenny and Sarah stepped onto the Sydney pavement, the knife still in her hand, its edge a silent threat. When she got out of the car, he drove away quickly. The car's taillights vanished, the driver's silence a confession of defeat. And then he drove away quickly. Jenny's heart still pounded, but a fierce pride surged within her. She'd turned the hunter into prey. The city's pulse welcomed them, its noise a stark contrast to the forest's menace. But the weight of that knife, its cold steel, lingered in her hand, a talisman of survival. Jenny and Sarah didn't speak of it immediately, their night out overshadowed by the near miss. The club's lights, the music, felt hollow, their laughter forced as they processed the driver's intent. Jenny kept the knife close, its presence a reminder of her strength, her refusal to be a victim. Sarah's eyes held a new respect, their bond deepened by the shared danger. They stayed in the city until dawn, unwilling to hitchhike back. The road's promise tainted by the forest's shadow. Jenny's mother, hearing the story years later, marveled at her daughter's courage. The knife a family legend. The incident reshaped Jenny's life. Her trust in strangers fractured. She carried the knife everywhere, its weight a comfort, a vow to never be caught off guard. She avoided rural roads, the memory of those trees too vivid, their branches a silent threat. Sarah moved away, their contact fading, but the story bound them, a secret shared in quiet moments. Jenny taught her own children to be wary, to trust their instincts. The knife now a relic in a drawer, its blade still sharp. She wondered about the driver, where he went, what he'd planned, but pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the victory, not the fear. Sydney's skyline became a symbol of survival, its lights a beacon against the dark. Jenny shared the story sparingly, her voice steady but her eyes distant, the forest's grip lingering. She searched for others who'd met such drivers, finding scattered tales of wrong turns and silent threats. But none matched her defiance. The knife, cleaned and folded, rested in her memory, a testament to the moment she took control. The road had tested her, but she'd emerged unbroken, her courage a light that outshone the terror of that night. The shadows morph. In the heart of an Australian woodland, the twilight can weave a trap for the unwary. The sparse forests of Australia, stretching mere hundreds of acres, were a playground for young Eli, their tangled paths a maze he'd wandered since childhood. A boy of keen instincts, he thrived on survival, his nights under the stars fueled by fish and creek water, his heart bound to the wild. The woods were his refuge, their silence a song of freedom. But some shadows wear forms that defy the light. Eli, lost once more, felt the familiar pang of disorientation, his steps steady as he gathered sticks to build a fire, the dusk creeping in like a thief. His knowledge, honed by family camping and endless videos, was his shield. The fire's glow a beacon in the gathering dark. He sat, the flames dancing, the forest alive with unseen eyes, its quiet a canvas for his thoughts. A small deer appeared at the tree line, just beyond the fire's reach, its gaze fixed, stirring unease in Eli's chest. He waved, a child's gesture, and the deer bolted into a bush, vanishing. The air shifted, the woods holding their breath, a whisper of danger in the rustling leaves. Moments later, a larger deer emerged from the same bush, its eyes unyielding, its presence a challenge Eli couldn't name. The forest was no longer his, its heart a pulse of something ancient. Eli stood, his fire a fragile guard, the deer's stare a hook in his soul. The shadow's morph was beginning, and Eli was its witness. Eli's instincts screamed, the larger deer's gaze a weight that pinned him. The forest, once a friend, was a labyrinth of menace, its shadows alive with intent. He backed away, crouching as the deer advanced, its hoof stepping into the fire, unburned despite the flames licking its flesh. The sight was wrong, the deer's indifference to pain a violation of nature, its fur charring without a flinch. Eli's heart pounded, his survival skills no match for the unnatural, his legs urging flight. He bolted, the deer pursuing, its pace steady, matching his frantic sprint through the underbrush. Over a hill, Eli dove into a bush, his breath ragged, the moonlight casting the deer's silhouette above. The forest was a predator, its silence a trap, the deer's form a lie. The creature screamed, a blood-curdling wail, its body collapsing inward, bones snapping, flesh tearing, shrinking, then swelling into a man's shape. Eli's eyes burned with terror, closing against the horror, reopening to see a human silhouette, its voice distorted, calling "hello" into the night. The call lingered, a taunt, the figure searching for 10 agonizing minutes before retreating, its steps marked by the same grotesque snapping. Eli stayed hidden, the bush his sanctuary, the forest a realm of nightmares he couldn't escape. The night was endless, Eli's fear a chain, the woods a puzzle he'd yet to solve. He waited for dawn, his heart set on home, the morphing shadow a scar on his soul. The shadow's morph was a curse, and Eli was its fugitive. Eli emerged at dawn, running until he reached a familiar road, his home a beacon of safety. The forest's grip lingered, its shadow a weight he couldn't shake, his silence a shield against doubt. He never spoke of the night, fearing disbelief, his love for the woods shattered, his family's camping trips now a memory he begged to avoid. Eli researched, his mind grasping for answers, stumbling on tales of skinwalkers, but the truth felt deeper, rooted in the land's ancient pulse. He sought elders, their stories of native spirits, cursed by broken rituals, aligning with the deer's morph, its call a plea twisted by pain. The forest held a guardian, its form fluid, its rage a remnant of a vow unkept, its pursuit a test Eli had passed. He returned, alone, with sage and offerings, his voice soft, honoring the spirit, seeking its peace. The woods softened, their air lighter, the shadows morph a memory, the curse eased. Eli's courage grew, his heart healed, the forest his once more, its spirits at rest. He lived with respect, his survival a tribute to the land's truth, his family's love a constant. The Australian wild was vast, its mysteries many, but Eli was its keeper. The shadow's morph was still, and he was free. Under the stars, Eli stood, the forest quiet, his soul unbound. The night was his, its shadows kind, its secrets honored. The spirit was silent, and Eli was whole. The shimmering orb. The Idaho sun blazed over the Lost River Mountains, its heat softened by the alpine breeze as Sam and Wayne trekked toward Upper Swager Lake, rods slung over their shoulders. The lake, a hidden gem nestled at the tree line, promised solitude and golden trout, its waters framed by rugged peaks and dry canyons. A friend of mine, Wayne, and I decided to spend the day fishing at Upper Swager Lake in the Lost River mountain range of Idaho. The journey was grueling, 100 miles from Idaho Falls, a bone-rattling four-wheel drive up a canyon, and a 1,000-foot hike. But the view was a reward. It's a 100-mile journey over a lonely highway from the region's largest town, Idaho Falls. When you hit the dirt road turn-off, there are miles of four-wheel driving up the canyon to the hiking trail. Once at the trailhead, it's a 2-mile or 1,000-foot toward vertical gain hike up to the lake. Sam, no fan of trout's muddy taste, loved the challenge, the isolation. Personally, I hate trout. They just taste like mud, but I do love fishing. But as they reached the lake, a distant rumble hinted at something beyond the peaks, something waiting. The lake sparkled under a cloudless sky, its surface a mirror for the Little Lost Range's bold silhouette. Visited mostly by locals, this alpine lake is tucked up on the ridge overseeing 2 long, dry canyons on opposite sides. It sits just at the top of the tree line, providing an uninhibited view of the sky and surrounding mountain peaks. They set up, casting lines, the day slipping by in laughter and quiet moments. We spent the day fishing, relaxing, and chatting, but the canyon below echoed with periodic booms, sharp and thunderous, like gunfire. Far down in the canyon, out of sight from us, we continually heard periodic loud blasts. Sam, raised in rural America, shrugged it off as target practice, common in these parts. Growing up in the rural US, you get accustomed to people target shooting in public land. And that's what we concluded was happening below us. The blasts, spaced out, suggested a muzzle-loading rifle, reloaded slowly. From the sheer thunderous, we guessed that it was a larger caliber muzzle-loading rifle. The blasts were paced out long enough, though, that they had to be manually reloading their guns. The echoes didn't deter them. The fishing was too good. The fishing was actually really great that day, and the day just seemed to really flash by us. Wayne reeled in his limit, Sam releasing his catch, their camp a haven of crackling fire and fading light. Wayne had caught his limit towards the end of the day, while I had been releasing mine. As twilight settled, the stars blinked into view, the sky a vast canvas. We settled down at the campfire, and we watched the sun sink behind the mountain peaks as Wayne cooked his muddy fish up. It was twilight now, and aside from the crackling of the fire, it was a quiet evening. The sky was absolutely clear, and we watched as the stars twinkled into existence in the sky, but the calm shattered. A blast. Closer now. Too close, rattling their bones. Our relaxation, though, was interrupted by yet another one of those thunderous explosions. Only this time, it was much closer to us. Target shooting at night was reckless, dangerous. That was weird. Target shooting is extremely dangerous at night. Whoever was down there in the canyon was being pretty irresponsible. Wayne's nudge broke Sam's thoughts, his finger pointing to the canyon's glow. A light, not at ground level, but aloft, moving. Wayne nudged me with his elbow and motioned for me to look in the direction of the sound that the last explosion came from. And while not directly visible to us, there was a light down in the mountain. It was illuminating the whole canyon. From the angle of the tree shadows, we could see the source of the light was not at ground level too. It was actually up high in the air, and it seemed to be moving. They watched, silent, as it glided upward. Hidden by trees, we watched in bewildered silence as the light moved up the canyon. We still could not get a direct line of sight of it. Another blast shook the air, the light flaring 100-fold, blinding. There was another blast that seemed to shake my skull. This time, the light in the canyon flashed almost 100 times brighter than before. Sam's mind reeled, the world tilting into the unknown. We could absolutely not make sense of anything that was happening at this point. The light crested the trees, rising into view, a brilliant, golden orb, 20 to 40 feet wide, shimmering like liquid fire. The light rose upwards out of the canyon as it crested the trees, and continued to rise. We could finally get a direct look at this thing. It was a brilliant ball of yellow golden light. Getting a size estimate was difficult, but I figured it was between maybe 20 to 40 feet in diameter. It hovered, silent, hundreds of feet above the lake, sparks leaping from its surface. The light rose silently above the canyon, and then above our elevation. At the lake, it stopped several hundred feet above the surrounding landscape and just stayed there. The object's surface shimmered and danced as we watched it. Little feathers of sparks would periodically jump away from the object and fall down towards the trees below. Sam and Wayne stared, speechless, their campfire dim against its glow. Wayne looked at me, and all I could do was shrug my shoulders and give him a "I have no idea" look. Then, without warning, it erupted. A deafening explosion of light and sound, shaking the earth. With no warning, it exploded in a deafening shower of sparks and blinding light. Sam and Wayne dove to the ground, hands over their heads, the light searing through their closed eyelids. Wayne and I instinctively jumped into the dirt and covered our heads. The light was so bright that I felt I could see through my closed eyelids. The shockwave pulsed through the dirt, a primal force unraveling the world. The explosion shook everything around us as well. I could feel the shock resonate in the ground beneath me. It was like the world was coming undone at the seams. Then, silence. Absolute. Suffocating. The darkness swallowing the orb's brilliance. Then, all of a sudden, everything was absolutely silent and dark. Sam lifted his head, the stars faint above, the camp unchanged. When we looked up into the sky, the ball of light was now gone. We were left alone in just the dim light of the stars. He stammered, voice hoarse. Picking myself up out of the dirt, all I could say to Wayne was, "What in the heck was that all about?" The camp was eerily intact. No scorched trees, no debris, as if the explosion had never happened. We surveyed the camp and the surrounding area. Nothing seemed damaged or disturbed. There were no signs of fires that were started from the explosion. In fact, it was like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But the campfire told a different story. Wayne's fish, once fresh, were charred cinders, the coals glowing red. Further baffling us was Wayne's fish. They were now charred cinders above a bed of red coals that was once our campfire. Sam checked his watch, his stomach dropping. Hours had vanished. Twilight replaced by deep night. The one thing that was off, though, was the time it was late twilight when the light exploded above us. But my watch was showing 2 in the morning now. The missing time defied reason, the explosion's brevity mocking the hours lost. Now, I'm well aware of the phenomenon of missing time, but that was just not possible. The stupid thing exploded. We hit the dirt, and then when we picked ourselves up, I don't know. It couldn't have been more than a couple of minutes. Sam's mind buckled, unable to process the orb, the blast, the time. I didn't have the mental capacity to process what had happened. I headed to my tent, and I went right to sleep. He crawled into his tent, sleep claiming him instantly, dreamless and heavy. It was a deep, dreamless sleep that night. Morning brought clarity. The lake serene. Wayne already fishing. When I awoke in the morning, the sun was illuminating the tent. Wayne was already up and fishing. Sam pressed him, needing answers. I asked him about his thoughts on what happened last night. Wayne's shrug was dismissive, his words half joking. He simply shrugged and said it either didn't happen or we saw something that we probably shouldn't have. It's that or Marvin the Martian tried to kill us or something. They fished briefly, the lake's beauty hollow, and left early. The camp's memory too raw. We fished for a few hours that morning, then decided against camping another night at the lake. We packed up camp, and we hiked down to our vehicle. The hike down was silent, the canyon's echoes gone, the orb a shared secret. Sam replayed the night, the light's dance, its explosion, the impossible hours. He considered lightning, atmospheric anomalies, but none fit. The orb was too deliberate, too alive. Wayne avoided the topic, their friendship strained by the unexplainable. Sam returned to Upper Swagger Lake over the years, its waters unchanged, but the sky felt heavier, as if watching. I've been back to that lake several times over the years. I've never seen or heard anything like what we saw that night again. The fish, the coals, the time, they were anchors, proof of something beyond his grasp. Sam's life moved on, but the orb lingered, a puzzle he couldn't solve. I don't have an explanation for what happened, and to be honest, I really don't believe that we ever will. He scoured books on UFOs, folklore, and science, finding tales of lights in the sky, but none with the orb's vivid presence, its explosive end. The Lost River Mountains held their secrets, their peaks silent witnesses to that night. He shared the story with a few, their skepticism a wall he couldn't breach. But Wayne's nervous chuckle, his refusal to dwell, was confirmation enough. Sam kept a flashlight by his camp now, its beam a futile guard against the dark. The lake became a place of pilgrimage, each visit a search for answers, for another glimpse. He'd stare at the stars, half hoping, half fearing the orb's return. The campfire's coals, the charred fish, haunted his dreams, symbols of a moment that bent time. He wondered if others had seen it, locals who fished those waters, their stories buried in silence. The orb's purpose, warning, accident, or something else, eluded him. Its light a question etched in his mind. Upper Swagger Lake remained, its beauty untouched. But for Sam, it was a threshold, a place where the world had cracked open, revealing something vast and unknowable.